In the opulent halls of London's Grand Aurelia, where chandeliers gleam and secrets whisper, Miss Jane Marple arrives for a nostalgic escape. But beneath the hotel's gilded surface, a web of crime unravels. A missing key, a cryptic note, a stolen jewel. Each clue pulls her deeper into a dangerous game. Who's hiding in the shadows? What ties the glamorous actress, the secretive businessman, and the nervous heiress? And why does danger lurk in every corner? Join Miss Marple as she unravels the hotel of hidden crimes where no one is what they seem, and every door hides a deadly truth. Chapter 1. Rival at the Grand Aurelia. Train's whistle pierced the autumnal haze as it slowed into London's Victoria Station, its rhythmic chug fading into a sigh of steam. Miss Jane Marple, perched neatly on the edge of her first-class seat, adjusted her gloves and peered through the window. The platform bustled with porters, fur-clad travelers, and the occasional newsboy hawking evening papers. London, in all its smoky grandeur, welcomed her back like an old friend, one with secrets tucked into every corner. At 72, Miss Marple retained the sprightly curiosity of her youth, though her step was more measured now. Her eyes, bright and unclouded, scanned the crowd with the quiet precision of a natural observer. This trip to the capital was a rare indulgence, prompted by a letter from her nephew Raymond, who had insisted she deserved a week of luxury at the Grand Aurelia, a hotel she hadn't visited since her girlhood. "And Jane," he'd written, "you mustn't bury yourself in St. Mary Mead forever. The Aurelia's still a marvel fit for a queen, or at least for you." She'd smiled at his flattery but accepted, sensing an adventure in the air. The porter, a young man with a crooked grin, hefted her modest suitcase as she alighted. "Grand Aurelia, ma'am?" he asked, noting her elegant but unostentatious attire: a tweed coat, a soft felt hat adorned with a single feather, and a brooch that gleamed with understated charm. "Yes, thank you," she replied, her voice clear and warm. "Is it far?" "Not at all, ma'am. A quick cab ride. Finest hotel in London, they say. Fit for royalty." Miss Marple nodded, amused. Royalty, indeed. She'd heard such claims before. But the Aurelia's reputation wasn't mere hyperbole. In her youth, it had been a beacon of Edwardian opulence, its chandeliers glittering like captured stars, its marble floors whispering of wealth and intrigue. She wondered how much had changed in 50 years. The cab wound through London's bustling streets, past omnibuses and street vendors, the city's pulse quickening as dusk settled. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the faces outside: hurried clerks, laughing couples, a man in a dark overcoat who glanced twice at her cab before vanishing into an alley. Her lips twitched. Old habits, she thought. St. Mary Mead had sharpened her knack for noticing the out-of-place, and London promised a richer tapestry of oddities. The Grand Aurelia loomed into view, its facade a symphony of creamy stone and arched windows illuminated by gaslights that flickered like invitations. A doorman in a crimson uniform swept open the heavy glass doors, and Miss Marple stepped into a world of polished grandeur. The lobby was a marvel, a domed ceiling painted with celestial motifs, crystal chandeliers casting prisms across the walls, and a marble staircase spiraling upward like a promise of secrets. The air carried the scent of beeswax polish and fresh roses, mingling with the faint tang of cigar smoke from the adjacent lounge. A young woman at the reception desk, her auburn hair pinned impeccably, greeted her with a smile. "Welcome to the Grand Aurelia, Miss Marple. We've reserved a suite on the 3rd floor, as per Mr. West's instructions. May I have your key prepared?" "Thank you, dear," Miss Marple said, noting the girl's name tag. "Evelyn. It's been many years since I last stayed here. The place hasn't lost its charm. Evelyn's smile widened. We pride ourselves on tradition, ma'am. Though we've modernized a bit, electric lights, hot water in every room. You'll find it comfortable. I hope. Miss Marple signed the register, her neat handwriting a contrast to the florid signatures above hers. As Evelyn handed her a brass key, a small commotion drew Miss Marple's attention to the far side of the lobby. A man in a pinstriped suit, his face flushed, was speaking urgently to a porter. He clutched a leather satchel, his fingers white-knuckled, and his eyes darted toward the staircase. Beside him stood a woman in a sapphire gown, her expression unreadable, but her posture tense, as if poised to flee. Careful with that, boy, the man snapped, thrusting the satchel at the porter. It's not to leave my sight. The porter, barely 20, nodded nervously. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. As the pair moved toward the lift, the woman slipped a folded paper into the man's pocket with a swift, practiced motion. He didn't notice, but Miss Marple did. Her eyes narrowed slightly. A note, perhaps. The lift doors closed, and the lobby resumed its hum of activity. But Miss Marple filed the moment away, her mind already turning over possibilities. Would you like assistance to your room, ma'am? Evelyn asked, drawing her back. No, thank you, Miss Marple replied. I'll manage. But might you tell me, is the lounge still open for tea? Oh, yes, ma'am. Until 6. The scones are divine. Miss Marple smiled. Then I shall have to try them. Thank you, Evelyn. She made her way to the lift, operated by a cheerful boy in a pillbox hat, and soon found herself in her suite. It was as elegant as promised. A 4-poster bed draped in damask, a writing desk overlooking Hyde Park, and a fireplace where a small blaze crackled. Her suitcase sat by the wardrobe, but she didn't unpack. Instead, she freshened up, adjusted her hat, and headed downstairs. Tea, she reasoned, was the perfect vantage point for observing the hotel's pulse. The lounge was a cozy contrast to the lobby's grandeur, with velvet armchairs, low tables, and a pianist playing a soft rendition of Chopin. Miss Marple chose a corner table, partially screened by a potted fern, and ordered tea with scones. As the waiter departed, her gaze swept the room. A group of American tourists chattered about their day at the British Museum. An elderly gentleman read the Times, his monocle glinting, and a young woman in a cloaky hat sat alone, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup, her eyes distant. The man from the lobby entered, sans satchel but still agitated. He scanned the room, then joined a table where a heavy-set man in a tweed suit waited, nursing a brandy. Their conversation was too low to hear, but Miss Marple noted the pinstriped man's frequent glances toward the door. The woman in the sapphire gown was absent, but her note lingered in Miss Marple's mind. What was it she didn't want him to see? Her tea arrived, the porcelain pot steaming, and she poured carefully, savoring the ritual. As she sipped, a new figure caught her eye, a woman of perhaps 40, draped in furs. Her blonde hair swept into an elaborate chignon. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to attention, and the room seemed to pause as she passed. A waiter addressed her as Lady Beatrice, and Miss Marple's memory stirred. Lady Beatrice Harrow, the actress, famed for her West End triumphs and rumored scandals. She settled at a table near the pianist, accepting a glass of champagne with a radiant smile. Miss Marple's scone was halfway to her mouth when she noticed a second exchange. Lady Beatrice's waiter, a lean man with slicked back hair, handed her a menu, but tucked within it was a small envelope. Lady Beatrice's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she slipped the envelope into her handbag. The waiter retreated, his expression neutral, but Miss Marple caught the faintest flicker of unease in his eyes. 2 notes in one afternoon, she mused. This hotel is positively bristling with secrets. The pinstriped man and his companion rose, their conversation apparently concluded. As they passed Miss Marple's table, a scrap of paper fell from the pinstriped man's pocket, the note from the woman in the sapphire gown. He didn't notice, but Miss Marple did. She waited until they were gone, then, with the agility of a much younger woman, retrieved it. It was folded tightly, the paper cheap but clean. She hesitated, then tucked it into her sleeve. Not here, she decided. Later, in private. The lounge began to empty as the dinner hour approached, but Miss Marple lingered, her tea growing cold. Lady Beatrice departed, her furs trailing like a comet's tail, and the young woman in the cloaky hat followed soon after, casting a wary glance over her shoulder. The pianist switched to a livelier tune, and Miss Marple felt a familiar thrill. The Grand Auralia was no mere hotel. It was a stage, and its players were already revealing their roles. She returned to her suite, the note burning a metaphorical hole in her sleeve. Locking the door, she unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was hurried. The ink smudged. The key is missing. Meet me at midnight. Don't trust the vault. No signature. No names. Miss Marple's lips pursed. A key, a vault, a midnight rendezvous, elements of a puzzle she couldn't yet solve. But her instincts, honed by years of unraveling St. Mary Mead's quieter mysteries, told her the note was no idle scribble. Someone in the Grand Auralia was in danger, and someone else was watching. She placed the note in her jewelry case, beneath a string of pearls, and sat by the fireplace, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. The hotel's elegance was a facade, she realized, concealing currents of deceit. The pinstriped man, the woman in the sapphire gown, Lady Beatrice, the waiter, each was a thread in a tapestry she was only beginning to glimpse. A clock on the mantel chimed 7, and Miss Marple rose, smoothing her dress. Dinner awaited, and, with it, more opportunities to observe. She smiled faintly, her eyes alight with purpose. The Grand Auralia had welcomed her with open arms, but it had also issued a challenge. And Jane Marple, with her unassuming air and razor-sharp mind, was more than ready to meet it. As she stepped into the corridor, the hotel seemed to hum with anticipation, its secrets whispering just out of reach. Midnight was hours away, but Miss Marple knew one thing for certain. Her stay at the Grand Auralia would be anything but ordinary. Chapter 2. The eccentric guests. Miss Jane Marple sat in her elegantly appointed room, on the 3rd floor of the Grand Auralia, her knitting needles clicking softly in the morning light filtering through heavy velvet curtains. The room was a study, in Edwardian opulence, polished mahogany furniture, a crystal chandelier casting delicate prisms across the walls, and a plush carpet that muffled her steps. She had arrived at the hotel only yesterday, yet already the air thrummed with the subtle undercurrents of intrigue she so keenly recognized. Her sharp eyes, undimmed by age, missed little, and the Grand Auralia, with its gleaming facade and whispered secrets, was proving to be a stage set for a most fascinating drama. She had chosen a seat by the window overlooking the bustling London street below, where horse-drawn carriages mingled with sleek motor cars, a reminder of the world's uneasy dance between old and new. Her hands worked steadily on a pale blue shawl, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the curious incident from the previous evening. The nervous guest in the lobby, his trembling fingers passing a folded note to a porter who had pocketed it with practiced ease. The note, she was certain, held significance, though its contents remained a tantalizing mystery. And then there was the phrase she had overheard. The missing key, spoken in hushed, urgent tones by shadowed figures near the grand staircase. It was enough to set her senses alight now, as she prepared to join the hotel's guests for afternoon tea in the Rosewood Lounge. Miss Marple felt the familiar thrill of a puzzle taking shape. She adjusted her lace cap, smoothed her modest black dress, and tucked her knitting into a tapestry bag. One must always be prepared, she murmured to herself, a faint smile playing on her lips, for people are rarely what they seem. The Rosewood Lounge was a marvel of decadence, its high ceilings adorned with frescoes of cherubs and ivy, its tables draped in crisp white linen and set with silver teapots that gleamed under the soft glow of chandeliers. The air was fragrant, with the scent of Darjeeling and freshly baked scones, and a string quartet played a gentle waltz in the corner. Miss Marple took a seat near the center of the room, her unobtrusive position offering a clear view of the guests filtering in. She opened her knitting bag, her fingers resuming their rhythm, but her eyes roamed with purpose, cataloging every detail. The first to catch her attention was Lady Beatrice Harcourt, a celebrated actress whose name had once graced every West End marquee. She swept into the lounge like a peacock, her emerald green gown shimmering with every step, her auburn hair piled high and adorned with a single ostrich feather. Her laughter was loud, her gestures theatrical, yet Miss Marple noted a brittleness in her smile, a flicker of unease as she scanned the room. Lady Beatrice settled at a table with a young man in a tailored suit, her voice carrying as she regaled him with tales of her latest triumph in the taming of the shrew. "My dear Charles," she said, her tone dripping with charm. The audience was simply enraptured. "I dare say I've never played Kate with such fire." Charles, a handsome man with slicked back hair and a pencil-thin mustache, nodded politely, but Miss Marple noticed his fingers drumming impatiently on the tablecloth. His eyes darted toward the entrance, as if expecting someone or something. She made a mental note. Charles was not as captivated by Lady Beatrice as she believed. Across the room, Colonel Reginald Thorne, retired from the Indian Army, sat stiffly in a high-backed chair, his waxed mustache twitching as he sipped his tea. His tweed suit was immaculate, his posture rigid, but his gaze was restless, lingering on the other guests with a scrutiny that mirrored Miss Marple's own. She recalled his brief introduction in the lobby yesterday, his booming voice declaring his fondness for the hotel's unchanging standards. Yet there was something in his demeanor, a tightness around the eyes, a clench of the jaw that suggested he was not here merely for nostalgia. At a smaller table near the window, Clara Wentworth, a young heiress whose delicate features and somber gray dress belied her wealth, sat alone, her hands clasped tightly round a teacup. Her auburn curls were pinned neatly, but a single strand had escaped, betraying a nervous habit of twisting it around her finger. Miss Marple had overheard a porter mention Clara's recent inheritance, a vast fortune from a shipping magnate father, but the girl's eyes held a wariness that spoke of more than grief. As Clara glanced up, her gaze met the Colonel's for a fleeting moment, and Miss Marple caught the faintest flinch before Clara looked away. The final guest of note was Mr. Victor Hargrove, a businessman whose somber black suit and heavy jowls gave him the air of a man perpetually burdened. He sat at a corner table, his briefcase at his feet, his fingers tapping a staccato rhythm on the leather. His eyes, small and shrewd behind round spectacles, darted toward the door every few moments, as if anticipating an interruption. "Miss Marple recalled the porter's whispered comment about Hargrave's urgent business in London, and she wondered what sort of commerce required such vigilance. The tea service began, waiters gliding between tables with trays of delicate sandwiches and pastries. Miss Marple accepted a cup of Earl Grey and a scone, her attention never wavering from the room. It was then that the first ripple of discord broke the surface. Lady Beatrice, in the midst of a dramatic anecdote, reached for her handbag, a beaded affair that matched her gown, and froze. Her hand trembled as she withdrew a small silver locket, its clasp broken, the chain dangling limply. "Oh, how careless of me," she said, her voice unnaturally high. "It must have snapped." Charles leaned forward, his brow furrowing. "Is that the one you always wear? B. The one with—" "Never mind, Charles," she cut him off, her smile tight. She tucked the locket into her bag, but not before Miss Marple glimpsed a tiny photograph inside a man's face, blurred but distinct enough to suggest it was not Charles. The actress's composure faltered, her eyes darting toward the Colonel, who was now engrossed in a newspaper, though Miss Marple suspected he was listening intently. Moments later, another small drama unfolded. Clara, reaching for a sugar cube, knocked over a teaspoon, which clattered to the floor. A waiter, a young man with sharp features and a shock of dark hair, swooped in to retrieve it. As he bent down, his sleeve rode up, revealing a tattoo on his wrist, a coiled snake, its fangs bared. Clara's teacup rattled in its saucer, her face paling as she stared at the tattoo. The waiter met her gaze for a split second before straightening, his expression unreadable. "My apologies, miss," he said smoothly, but Clara's hands trembled as she nodded. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind racing. The tattoo was no mere decoration. Clara's reaction confirmed it held significance. A family crest, perhaps, or a mark of some illicit affiliation. She filed the observation away, her eyes drifting to Mr. Hargrove, who had risen abruptly, his briefcase clutched tightly. He muttered an excuse about a telephone call and strode toward the lounge's entrance, his gait purposeful but tense. As Hargrove passed Lady Beatrice's table, a folded piece of paper slipped from his pocket, fluttering to the floor unnoticed by him but not by Miss Marple. She waited until he was out of sight before rising, her movements slow and deliberate to avoid attention. She retrieved the paper, tucking it into her sleeve as she returned to her seat. It was a telegram, brief and cryptic. "Confirmed delivery by midnight. Vault secure. No delays." The signature was a single initial. R. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The vault, the missing key, the nervous businessman pieces of a puzzle were falling into place, though the picture remained tantalizingly incomplete. She glanced at Colonel Thorne, whose newspaper had lowered slightly, his eyes fixed on the spot where Hargrove had exited. Was R for Reginald? Or was there another player in this game? The string quartet shifted to a livelier tune, and the room buzzed with renewed conversation. But Miss Marple's focus remained sharp. She noted the way Lady Beatrice's hand lingered on her bag, as if guarding the broken locket. The way Clara's eyes followed the waiter, who now moved with a shade too much purpose. The way the Colonel's fingers traced the edge of his teacup, a gesture too deliberate to be idle. Each guest, she realized, was a thread in a tapestry of secrets. And the Grand Auralia was no mere hotel, it was a stage where motives and masks collided. As the tea service drew to a close, a final incident sealed Miss Marple's certainty that danger was afoot. Lady Beatrice rose to leave, her laughter ringing out as she bid Charles farewell. But as she passed the concierge's desk near the lounge's entrance, a porter handed her a sealed envelope. Her face drained of color as she opened it, her eyes scanning the contents. She crumpled the paper and stuffed it into her bag, her movements jerky. Miss Marple, positioned perfectly to observe, caught a glimpse of the envelope's edge black ink, bold handwriting, and a single word visible. "Pay." The actress hurried out, her feather bobbing unsteadily, and Miss Marple leaned back in her chair, her knitting needles resuming their rhythm. A threatening letter, a broken locket, a cryptic telegram, a tattoo that sparked fear. The Grand Auralia was a cauldron of secrets, and Miss Marple was determined to stir it. She sipped her tea, her mind weaving connections as delicate and intricate as the lace she wore. The eccentric guests, each with their hidden agendas, were players in a drama she would unravel, one quiet observation at a time. As the lounge emptied, Miss Marple gathered her things, her heart light with the thrill of the chase. She would return to her room, but not to rest. The telegram, the locket, the tattoo, these were clues, and she would follow them. The Grand Auralia, with its polished surfaces and shadowed corners, was hiding crimes, and Miss Marple, with her unassuming air and razor-sharp mind, was ready to bring them to light. Chapter 3. The midnight disturbance. Grand Auralia's chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the lobby as Miss Jane Marple ascended the grand staircase to her room. On the third floor, the plush carpet muffled her steps, and the faint hum of conversation from the lounge below faded into a soothing quiet. It was nearing 11 o'clock, and though the day's journey from St. Mary Mead had been tiring, her mind buzzed with the peculiarities she'd observed since her arrival. The nervous guest with the cryptic note, the subtle tensions at tea, these were the threads of a tapestry she could not yet see, but was determined to unravel. Her room, number 312, was a charming blend of Edwardian elegance and modern comfort. A four-poster bed with crisp linens, a mahogany writing desk, and a window overlooking the glittering lights of London. Miss Marple set her knitting bag on the desk, her fingers brushing the soft wool of an unfinished scarf. She was just about to change into her nightgown when a sharp noise pierced the stillness. A clatter, followed by a muffled curse, echoing from the corridor. She paused, her hand on the door handle, her curiosity sharper than any fatigue. Opening the door a crack, she peered into the dimly lit hallway. The gaslight sconces flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the damask wallpaper. At the far end of the corridor, near the service stairs, stood Mr. Ernest Hargrove, the secretive businessman she'd noted earlier at tea. His tall, lean frame was hunched over, his hands frantically patting the carpet as if searching for a lost treasure. His usually impeccable suit was disheveled, and his face, illuminated by a nearby lamp, was taut with panic. Miss Marple stepped back, leaving the door ajar just enough to observe without being seen. Mr. Hargrove muttered to himself, his voice low but urgent. "Where is it? It has to be here." He straightened abruptly, his eyes darting toward the service stairs, where a young porter appeared, his uniform slightly askew, as if he'd been roused from a nap. "Mr. Hargrove, sir, is everything all right?" the porter asked, his tone deferential but tinged with unease. "No, it's not all right," Hargrove snapped, his voice sharp enough to make the porter flinch. "My briefcase, it's gone. I left it right here, by my door, not 10 minutes ago. Someone's taken it." The porter, a weary lad with freckles and nervous eyes, shifted his. "Wait, are you sure, sir? Perhaps you left it in the lounge?" "I can check. I didn't leave it in the lounge." Hargrove's voice rose, then dropped to a hiss. "I need that case. It's vital. You understand?" The porter nodded, clearly intimidated. "I'll fetch Mr. Pembroke, sir. He's the night manager. He'll know what to do." As the porter scurried off, Miss Marple eased her door closed, her mind racing. A missing briefcase was no small matter, especially for a man like Hargrove, whose guarded demeanor at tea had suggested he was hiding something. She recalled his quick glances around the room, the way he'd clutched that same briefcase, black leather, monogrammed with EH, as if it were a lifeline. What could be so important that its loss would reduce a man of his composure to near hysteria? She slipped into her slippers and donned a shawl, deciding that a closer look was warranted. After all, a midnight disturbance in a place as refined as the Grand Aurelia was not to be ignored. She stepped into the corridor, her movements silent and deliberate, her small frame blending into the shadows. The hallway was empty now, save for the faint creak of the hotel settling and the distant chime of a clock striking midnight. As she approached the spot where Hargrove had been searching, her sharp eyes caught a glint on the carpet, a small, torn piece of a photograph, no larger than a postage stamp. She bent down, her knees protesting slightly, and picked it up with care. The fragment showed part of a woman's face. Dark hair, a delicate jawline, and a single, striking eye staring directly at the camera. The rest was torn away, but the quality of the print suggested it was recent, not some faded memento. Tucked into the carpet's edge, almost invisible, was a tiny shred of paper with a few scrawled letters. Rove. "Meet me at." Miss Marple slipped the fragment and scrap into her pocket, her heart quickening. The photograph and note were no accident, they were clues, dropped in haste or carelessness. She glanced toward Hargrove's room, number 308, its door slightly ajar. A faint light spilled out, and she heard the low murmur of a voice, Hargrove's. She presumed, though the words were indistinct. She hesitated. To knock would be to announce her presence, and Miss Marple preferred to observe unnoticed for now. Instead, she moved toward the service stairs, where the porter had vanished. The stairs were narrow, meant for staff, and led to the lower floors and the hotel's service areas. As she descended a few steps, she heard footsteps below, heavy, deliberate ones. Unlike the porter's lighter tread, she paused, pressing herself against the wall, and listened. "Can't afford another mistake," a man's voice said, low and clipped. It wasn't Hargrove's. This voice had a rougher edge, with a faint trace of an accent, perhaps northern, though Miss Marple couldn't place it precisely. "If he's lost it, we're done for." Another voice, softer and more anxious, replied. "He swears it was taken. Says he left it by his door for a moment to speak with." "Speak with who?" The first voice snapped. "He's been too careless. If that case falls into the wrong hands." The voices faded as the men moved further down the stairwell, out of earshot. Miss Marple's lips pursed. A stolen briefcase, a cryptic conversation, and now this torn photograph. Each piece suggested a puzzle far more intricate than a simple theft. She returned to the corridor, her mind cataloging every detail. Hargrove's panic, the porter's unease, the photograph's mysterious woman, and that note, "Meet me at." Where? And why? Back in the corridor, she noticed the night manager, Mr. Pembroke, approaching Hargrove's room. He was a stout man with a meticulously groomed mustache and an air of calm authority, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of concern. Miss Marple stepped forward, adopting her most disarming smile. "Oh, Mr. Pembroke, I do hope I'm not intruding," she said, her voice soft and slightly tremulous, as if she were merely a flustered old lady. "I heard such a commotion, and I couldn't help but wonder if all was well." Pembroke turned, his expression smoothing into professional courtesy. "Miss Marple, isn't it? No cause for alarm, I assure you. Just a small misunderstanding with one of our guests. Nothing to trouble yourself over. Oh, I'm sure you have it all in hand," she replied, her eyes twinkling with feigned innocence. "But I did overhear poor Mr. Hargrove mention a missing briefcase. Such a worry. Losing something important in a place like this." Pembroke's smile tightened ever so slightly. "Indeed, madam. We're looking into it. Likely misplaced. Nothing more. Now, if you'll excuse me." Of course," Miss Marple said, stepping aside. But as Pembroke knocked on Hargrove's door, she caught a glimpse of the businessman inside, pacing like a caged animal. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he gestured to Pembroke. The door closed behind them, muffling their conversation. But Miss Marple lingered, her ears straining. She returned to her room, her mind a whirl of possibilities. The briefcase was clearly central to the mystery. But why? Was it papers, money, or something more sinister? And who was the woman in the photograph? The note suggested a rendezvous. But with whom? And for what purpose? Miss Marple sat at the writing desk, pulling out her knitting to steady her thoughts. The rhythmic click of the needles was a comfort, a counterpoint to the chaos of her deductions. Whereupon, she recalled a similar incident from years ago in St. Mary Mead, when a young man's lost satchel had revealed a web of blackmail and deceit. People, she mused, were much the same everywhere, whether in a quiet village or a grand hotel. They hid their secrets, but secrets had a way of slipping out, like threads from a poorly woven cloth. She paused, her needles still, as a new thought struck her. The porter's nervousness, the night manager's quick dismissal both suggested a desire to keep the matter quiet. Too quiet, perhaps. The Grand Auralia prided itself on discretion. But was it protecting its reputation, or something more? She resolved to keep a closer eye on the staff as well as the guests. The photograph fragment lay on the desk, the woman's eyes staring up at her. Miss Marple turned it over, noting the faint watermark of a London studio. It was a clue, small but significant. She would visit the studio, perhaps, or inquire discreetly. Among the staff, someone must know this woman, or why her image was in Hargrove's possession. A soft knock at her door startled her. She slipped the photograph into her knitting bag and opened the door to find the young porter from earlier, his cap clutched in his hands. "Begging your pardon, Miss Marple," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Pembroke sent me to check on you. Said you might have been disturbed by the noise." "How thoughtful," Miss Marple replied, her smile warm but her eyes sharp. "I'm quite all right, thank you. Though I must say, it's dreadful about Mr. Hargrove's briefcase. Have you found it yet?" The porter's eyes flickered to the floor. "Not yet, ma'am. We're searching the lounge and the cloakroom. It'll turn up, I'm sure." "Of course," she said kindly. "You must be very busy, working so late. Have you been with the hotel long?" "Only a few months, ma'am," he replied, shifting uncomfortably. "I should get back." "Good night, Miss Marple." "Good night," she said, watching him hurry away. His unease was palpable, and Miss Marple wondered if it stemmed from fear of his employer or something more personal. She closed the door, her mind returning to the photograph. The porter had seen something. She was certain, perhaps even the person who took the briefcase. As the clock struck 1, Miss Marple settled into an armchair, her knitting abandoned for the moment. She closed her eyes, letting the pieces of the puzzle arrange themselves in her mind. Hargrove's panic, the torn photograph, the cryptic note, the overheard conversation in the stairwell all pointed to a deeper mystery, one woven into the very fabric of the Grand Aurelia. She thought of the hotel's gleaming facade, its polished surfaces hiding who knew what beneath. Like a village, she thought, with its gossip and secrets, only grander in scale. She rose, retrieving a small notebook from her bag. In her neat, precise handwriting, she jotted down her observations. Hargrove briefcase. Vital contents, possibly stolen. Photograph woman, unknown, connected to Hargrove. Note rendezvous. Location unclear. Porter nervous, hiding something. Pembroke too quick to dismiss. Voices in stairwell conspiracy. She paused, then added, check photography studio. Observe staff. Satisfied, she tucked the notebook away and prepared for bed, though sleep would not come easily. The Grand Aurelia was no longer just a nostalgic retreat, it was a stage for a drama. She was determined to understand. As she drifted off, the image of the woman's eye lingered in her mind, a silent challenge to uncover the truth. The next morning, Miss Marple awoke early, her resolve unshaken. At breakfast, she chose a table near the window, where she could observe the comings and goings of the guests and staff. Hargrove was absent, but the porter was there, serving coffee with a forced smile. Pembroke moved through the dining room, his demeanor as polished as ever, but Miss Marple noted the faint strain in his eyes. She sipped her tea, her mind already planning her next move. The photograph would be her starting point. She would visit the studio, if she could find it, and inquire about the woman, and she would watch Hargrove, if he reappeared, and the porter, whose nervousness suggested he knew more than he let on. The Grand Aurelia's secrets were beginning to unravel, and Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence and unerring instinct, was ready to pull the next thread. The chapter closed with her setting down her teacup, her eyes bright with anticipation. The game was afoot, and Miss Marple was in her element. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Dining Room. The Grand Aurelia's dining room shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers, their prisms scattering light across damask tablecloths and polished silver. The air hummed with the clink of fine china and the murmur of refined conversation. But Miss Jane Marple, seated at a discreet table near the window, sensed a current of unease beneath the elegance. Her keen eyes, framed by delicate spectacles, darted from face to face, cataloging the guests, with the precision of a naturalist studying rare specimens. Tonight, she felt, the hotel's secrets would begin to unravel. Like a skein of wool tugged by an unseen hand, she adjusted her lace shawl, her fingers brushing the pearl brooch at her collar, and sipped her consomme, its warmth a comfort against the chill of her suspicions. The room was a tableau of wealth and pretense. Lady Beatrice, the actress, held court at a central table, her laughter a touch too bright. Colonel Rutherford, retired and ramrod straight, nursed a whiskey with a scowl. Mr. Hargrove, the secretive businessman, sat alone, his fork hovering over untouched salmon. And Clara Winthrop, the young heiress, picked at her plate, her eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the gilded walls. Miss Marple's attention lingered on Clara, whose auburn curls caught the candlelight. The girl's posture was rigid, her gloved hands clasped tightly in her lap, as if bracing for an unseen blow. Earlier that day, at afternoon tea, Miss Marple had noticed Clara's fleeting panic when Colonel Rutherford had asked about her late father, a shipping magnate whose death had been shrouded in whispers of bankruptcy. Now, as the colonel's voice carried across the room, recounting a tale of his Indian campaigns, Clara's lips tightened, and she excused herself, her chair scraping softly against the parquet floor. Poor dear, Miss Marple murmured to herself, her voice barely audible over the string quartet's rendition of Vivaldi. She carries a burden heavier than those diamonds around her neck. The dining room's rhythm shifted as a young waiter, Oliver, approached Clara's table to clear her plate. He was slight, with dark hair slicked back and an air of quiet competence. But Miss Marple's eyes narrowed as she caught the flicker of recognition in Clara's face. Oliver's hand faltered, and a glass of claret tipped, its contents splashing across the tablecloth like a wound. The room hushed for a moment, heads turning, but Oliver recovered swiftly, muttering apologies. As he dabbed at the stain with a napkin, Clara's voice was sharp, though low. "Be careful, for heaven's sake." But her eyes, wide and searching, lingered on Oliver's wrist, where the cuff of his shirt had ridden up, revealing a tattoo, a coiled serpent. Its ink faded but distinct. Miss Marple, ever observant, saw Clara's breath catch, her hand gripping the edge of the table. Oliver tugged his sleeve down and retreated, his face a mask of neutrality. But not before Miss Marple noted the brief, charged glance they exchanged. "Curious," Miss Marple whispered, her spoon pausing mid-air. "Very curious indeed." The incident passed unnoticed by most, the room resuming its chatter. But Miss Marple's mind was alight. She recalled a conversation from her youth in St. Mary Mead, when her nephew Raymond had spoken of sailors' tattoos, symbols of brotherhood, or betrayal etched into skin. A serpent, he'd said, often marked those bound by a dangerous pact. And Clara's reaction, fear, not surprise, suggested she knew the tattoo's significance. Miss Marple filed the observation away, her thoughts interrupted by the arrival of her main course, a perfectly roasted pheasant. As she dined, she turned her attention to the other guests. Lady Beatrice, her emerald gown shimmering, was regaling her table with a story of her latest West End triumph. But her eyes darted nervously toward the dining room's entrance, as if expecting an unwelcome visitor. Mr. Hargrove, meanwhile, had abandoned his meal entirely, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm on the tablecloth. Miss Marple wondered about the torn photograph she'd found in the corridor the previous night, showing Hargrove with a woman whose face had been obscured. Was he waiting for her here, or fleeing from her memory? The quartet struck up a waltz, and a few couples rose to dance in the small cleared space near the windows. Miss Marple's gaze followed Colonel Rutherford, who had joined Lady Beatrice for a turn, his hand resting lightly on her waist. Their conversation appeared amiable, but Miss Marple noted the Colonel's grip tighten briefly when Beatrice mentioned a mutual friend. In Cairo, the actress laughed, but her eyes were wary, and Miss Marple sensed a shared secret, one that bound them in mutual distrust. The evening wore on, and Miss Marple's table offered a perfect vantage point to observe the room's undercurrents. She declined dessert, opting for a cup of chamomile tea, its steam curling like a question mark. Her thoughts returned to Clara, who had not rejoined her table. Miss Marple had seen her slip out through a side door leading to the hotel's conservatory, a glass-walled haven filled with exotic plants. The heiress's hurried exit, coupled with her reaction to Oliver's tattoo, suggested she sought solitude or perhaps a clandestine meeting. Miss Marple's musings were cut short by a soft thud from the far end of the dining room. A silver tray slipped from Oliver's hands, scattering petits fours across the floor. The head waiter, a stern man named Mr. Grayson, appeared instantly, his voice a low hiss as he reprimanded Oliver. The younger man's face flushed, but he nodded, bending to gather the pastries. Miss Marple's eyes followed him, noting the way his hands trembled not with embarrassment, but with suppressed anger. As he straightened, His gaze flickered toward the conservatory door, and Miss Marple's suspicion deepened. "Something is afoot," she murmured, setting her teacup down with a delicate clink. She rose, her movements unhurried, and excused herself from the dining room, her shawl draped elegantly over her shoulders. The conservatory beckoned, its glass walls glowing faintly under the moon's light, and Miss Marple felt the familiar thrill of a puzzle taking shape. The conservatory was a world apart from the dining room's formality, its air thick with the scent of jasmine and damp earth. Palms and ferns loomed in the shadows, their fronds brushing against Miss Marple's skirt as she navigated the narrow path. She moved silently, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the tiled floor. Ahead, she heard a whisper, sharp and urgent, followed by the rustle of fabric. Peering through a curtain of ivy, Miss Marple glimpsed Clara, her back to a marble statue of Venus, speaking in hushed tones to Oliver. The waiter's posture was tense, his hands clenched at his sides. Miss Marple strained to hear, catching fragments of their conversation. "You promised you'd never come here," Clara was saying, her voice trembling. "If they find out, they won't," Oliver cut in, his tone low but fierce. "Not if you keep quiet. I didn't choose this, Clara. You know that." Miss Marple's heart quickened. The familiarity in their exchange suggested a shared history, one fraught with danger. She edged closer, careful not to disturb the foliage, and caught sight of Clara's face. Pale and drawn, the heiress reached into her reticule, producing a small, folded paper, which she thrust into Oliver's hand. "Take it and go," she said, "before it's too late." Oliver hesitated, then tucked the paper into his jacket. "This doesn't end it," he warned. "You know what they're capable of." Miss Marple's mind raced, piecing together the clues. The tattoo, Clara's fear, the cryptic paper. She recalled a case from her village, where a young man's tattoo had marked him as part of a smuggling ring, his loyalty bought with threats. Was Oliver entangled in something similar, and had Clara been drawn into it through her brother, rumored to have vanished under suspicious circumstances? The conversation ended abruptly as Clara turned, her eyes scanning the shadows. Miss Marple stepped back, her breath catching, but the heiress didn't notice her. Clara hurried toward the dining room, her footsteps echoing, while Oliver lingered, his hand brushing the paper in his pocket. Miss Marple waited, her pulse steady, until he too departed, his silhouette vanishing into the hotel's corridors. She emerged from her hiding place, her mind a whirl of possibilities. The conservatory felt suddenly oppressive, its beauty masking the secrets it held. Miss Marple made her way back to the dining room, her expression serene, but her thoughts were anything but. She resumed her seat, her tea now cold, and scanned the room. Clara had returned, her composure restored, though her eyes avoided Oliver as he served another table. The Colonel and Lady Beatrice were deep in conversation, their heads bent close, while Mr. Hargrove had vanished, his chair empty. Miss Marple's fingers traced the rim of her teacup, her thoughts coalescing. The tattoo, the paper, Clara's whispered warning, each was a thread in a tapestry of deceit. She recalled a remark from Inspector Davy, met earlier that day, about the Grand Aurelia's reputation as a haven for discreet dealings. "Even the walls have secrets," he'd said, and Miss Marple now believed him. The evening drew to a close, guests drifting toward the lounge or their rooms. Miss Marple lingered, her eyes on Oliver as he cleared the last tables. He moved with purpose, but she caught the flicker of unease in his glance toward Clara. As he passed her table, she spoke softly, her voice warm but probing. "A trying evening. "Young man," she said, her smile disarming. "Accidents do happen, but you managed well." Oliver paused, his eyes meeting hers briefly. "Thank you, Mum," he said, his tone polite but guarded. He moved on, but Miss Marple noted the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand strayed to his pocket. She rose, her decision made. The night's events had confirmed her suspicions. The Grand Aurelia was no mere hotel, but a stage for a dangerous game. Clara and Oliver were players, willingly or not, and Miss Marple intended to uncover the rules. As she left the dining room, the quartet's final notes fading, she overheard Clara's voice from the lounge, sharp and low. "He shouldn't be here," the heiress whispered, to whom Miss Marple could not see. "Not after what happened." Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. The shadows in the dining room had revealed more than she'd hoped, and the puzzle was far from solved. She retired to her room, her mind alive with questions, ready to unravel the secrets of the Grand Aurelia, one thread at a time. The dining room had emptied, but its echoes lingered in Miss Marple's thoughts as she ascended the grand staircase to her suite. The hotel's corridors were hushed, the gaslights casting soft pools of light on the crimson carpet. She paused at her door, her key in hand, and glanced down the hall. A figure moved swiftly at the far end. A man, she thought, though the shadows obscured his face. Was it Oliver, or someone else drawn into the web she'd begun to sense? She entered her room, locking the door behind her, and sat at the small writing desk. From her reticule, she withdrew a notebook, its pages filled with her neat, spidery handwriting. She began to jot down the night's observations. Clara's fear, Oliver's tattoo, the whispered exchange in the conservatory. Each detail was a clue, and Miss Marple knew from experience that even the smallest could prove pivotal. As she wrote, her mind drifted to St. Mary Mead, where she'd once solved a murder by noticing a maid's hesitation over a spilled teacup. The Grand Aurelia was grander, its players more sophisticated, but human nature, she mused, remained the same. Greed, fear, loyalty, betrayal, these were the currents that drove the hotel's secrets, and Miss Marple was determined to navigate them. She closed her notebook, her eyes drifting to the window, where London's lights twinkled against the night. The city was vast, its dangers manifold, but Miss Marple felt no fear. The dining room's shadows had given her a glimpse of the truth, and she would follow it, step by careful step, until the Grand Aurelia's hidden crimes were laid bare. Chapter 5. The locked room riddled. Grand Aurelia's chandeliered dining room still buzzed with the afterglow of the evening's lavish meal, though the clink of crystal and murmur of polite conversation had faded into a softer hum. Miss Jane Marple, seated at her corner table with a cup of chamomile tea, let her gaze drift across the room. Her knitting needles clicked rhythmically in her lap, a comforting habit that masked her razor-sharp observation. The guests, adorned in silks and dinner jackets, seemed to shimmer under the golden light, but Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the subtle cracks in their polished facades. A nervous tick, a glance too long, a hand that trembled ever so slightly. It was just past 9 when the scream shattered the evening's calm. High-pitched and raw, it tore through the hotel like a shard of glass, silencing the chatter. Heads turned, forks paused midair, and Miss Marple's needles stilled. The sound came from the direction of the East Wing, where the Aurelia's most luxurious suites were housed. A second scream followed, fainter but no less urgent, and then a flurry of footsteps echoed in the marble corridor beyond. Miss Marple set her knitting aside and rose, her movements deliberate but swift for a woman of her years. She adjusted her lavender shawl and made her way toward the commotion, her sensible shoes tapping softly against the polished floor. A small crowd had already gathered near the grand staircase, their faces a mix of curiosity and alarm. Hotel staff in crisp uniforms darted about, their usual composure fraying at the edges. "What's happened?" Miss Marple asked a young porter, whose freckled face was pale under the gaslight. "It's Lady Beatrice, mum," he stammered, clutching a brass keyring. "Her sweet something's been stolen. She's in a right state." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Lady Beatrice, the flamboyant actress whose every gesture seemed rehearsed for an invisible audience, had been the subject of whispers since her arrival. Her sapphire necklace, the star of Lahore, was rumored to be worth a fortune and cursed, if one believed the tabloids. Miss Marple, of course, placed little stock in curses, but she knew the allure of such a jewel could inspire very real mischief. She followed the porter up the sweeping staircase, her hand lightly grazing the mahogany banister. The East Wing's corridor was a vision of Edwardian splendor, crimson wallpaper embossed with gold, crystal sconces casting prisms on the walls, and thick Persian rugs muffling footsteps. But the air was thick with tension as guests and staff clustered outside Suite 312, Lady Beatrice's rooms. The door stood ajar, guarded by Mr. Grayson, the hotel manager, whose usually impeccable suit was slightly askew. "Miss Marple," he greeted, his voice strained but polite. "I'm afraid there's been an incident. Perhaps you'd best return to the lounge." "Nonsense, Mr. Grayson," she replied, her tone mild but firm. "I may be of some use. Lady Beatrice is clearly distressed, and I've a knack for calming nerves." Before he could protest, a wail erupted from within the suite, and Lady Beatrice herself appeared in the doorway. Her auburn hair was disheveled, her emerald gown askew, and her kohl-rimmed eyes wide with panic. "It's gone," she cried, clutching the doorframe. "The star of Lahore stolen from my safe. Oh, someone will pay for this." Miss Marple slipped past Mr. Grayson, her curiosity now fully ignited. The suite was a study in extravagance. Velvet drapes, a four-poster bed piled with silk cushions, and a marble fireplace glowing with embers. A gilt-framed mirror reflected the chaos. Lady Beatrice pacing, a maid wringing her hands, and two porters standing awkwardly by a mahogany writing desk. At the far end of the room, a small wall safe stood open, its door swinging slightly as if mocking the actress's distress. "Now, Lady Beatrice," Miss Marple said soothingly, guiding her to a chaise lounge. "Take a deep breath and tell me exactly what happened. Every detail matters." The actress dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, her theatrics only half convincing. "I returned from dinner not half an hour ago," she began, her voice trembling. "I wanted to wear the star for tomorrow's gala. It's the centerpiece of my ensemble. You see, I opened the safe, as I always do, with my key and the combination, and it was empty. The necklace, the velvet case, everything gone." Miss Marple's eyes flicked to the safe. It was a modern model, compact but sturdy, embedded in the wall behind a portrait of a stern Victorian gentleman. The lock showed no signs of tampering, no scratches, no dents. "And who else knew the combination?" she asked. "No one," Lady Beatrice insisted. "I change it daily, and I keep the key on my person at all times." She patted her bosom, where a thin gold chain disappeared beneath her gown. "It's still here, thank heavens." Miss Marple nodded, her mind already turning. A locked safe, an untampered lock, and a key never out of sight. The puzzle was intriguing, but her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Chief Inspector Davy, his familiar bulldog face set in a frown. He tipped his hat to Miss Marple, a flicker of respect in his eyes. They had crossed paths before, and he knew better than to underestimate her. "Miss Marple," he said gruffly, "fancy finding you here. Care to share any observations before I take over?" "Only that the thief was clever," she replied, her voice soft but pointed, "and possibly very close to Lady Beatrice. The safe wasn't forced, which suggests intimate knowledge." Davy grunted, motioning for his constable to begin dusting the safe for fingerprints. Miss Marple stepped back, her eyes sweeping the room. Something caught her attention near the fireplace, a glint of metal half hidden beneath the rug. She bent down, pretending to adjust her shawl, and retrieved a silver cufflink engraved with a tiny anchor. It was distinctive, masculine, and out of place in a lady's suite. She tucked it into her reticule, her heart quickening. The cufflink was a clue, but to whom? The colonel, with his naval background, came to mind, but so did Mr. Hargrove, the secretive businessman who favored monogrammed accessories. And then there was the waiter, whose tattoo had sparked such a reaction from Clara at dinner. The hotel was a web of connections, and Miss Marple sensed the threads tightening. As Inspector Davy questioned Lady Beatrice, Miss Marple slipped into the corridor, where the crowd had thinned. The porter from earlier hovered nearby, his keyring jangling. Nervously, "Young man," she said, her tone grandmotherly, "who has access to these suites?" "The staff, I mean." He hesitated, glancing at Mr. Grayson, who was deep in conversation with a guest. "Well, ma'am, only the head housekeeper, Mr. Grayson, and the concierge of Master Keys. And the maids, of course, but they're supervised. And the safes," she pressed. "Who installs or services them?" "That'd be Mr. Whitlock, the locksmith. He comes by once a month to check the mechanisms, but he's not been here in weeks." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind racing. A master key or a locksmith's expertise could explain the theft, but the absence of forced entry pointed to someone with direct access to the combination. She recalled Lady Beatrice's insistence that no one knew it, yet her dramatic nature suggested a tendency to overshare. Had she let something slip in a moment of carelessness? The corridor was quiet now, save for the soft hum of a vacuum cleaner in a distant room. Miss Marple's eyes fell on a small table near the suite's door, where a vase of roses stood. One petal lay on the floor, crushed as if stepped on. She bent to examine it, noticing a faint smudge of dirt beside it to find for a guest's polished shoe, more like the grit from a service stairwell. Someone had been here, someone who didn't belong. She straightened, her thoughts interrupted by a sharp voice. "Miss Marple, what are you doing out here?" It was Mr. Grayson, his eyes narrowing. "The police have matters in hand. There's no need for guests to involve themselves." "Oh, I'm merely stretching my legs," she said airily, her smile disarming. "But tell me, Mr. Grayson, how secure are the staff entrances? A hotel this grand must have many comings and goings." His jaw tightened, but he answered smoothly. "Our security is impeccable, I assure you. All service doors are locked, and only authorized personnel have keys." "Of course," she murmured, but her mind was elsewhere. The smudge of dirt, the cufflink, the unforced safe, they were pieces of a puzzle, and she was determined to fit them together. As she returned to her room, the hotel's elegance seemed to fade, revealing a shadow of deceit beneath its gilded surface. The next morning, the Grand Aurelia buzzed with gossip. The theft of the Star of Lahore was the talk of the breakfast room. where guests traded theories over poached eggs and toast. Miss Marple, seated near a window overlooking the hotel's manicured gardens, listened with half an ear, her attention on the staff. The waiter from last night, whose tattoo had unsettled Clara, moved with a practiced ease, but his eyes darted toward the east wing more than once. She sipped her tea, recalling the cufflink. An anchor design could belong to anyone with a nautical bent, but the colonel's blustery tales of his naval service made him a likely candidate. Yet Mr. Hargrave's monogrammed shirts and tense demeanor suggested he, too, might favor such accessories. And what of the waiter? His connection to Clara hinted at a deeper role in the hotel's secrets. As she pondered, Clara herself entered the breakfast room, her pale face drawn. She hesitated, then approached Miss Marple's table. "May I join you?" she asked, her voice low. "Of course, my dear," Miss Marple said warmly, gesturing to the empty chair. "You look troubled. Is it the theft?" Clara sat, her fingers twisting a napkin. "It's more than that. I saw something last night. After the commotion, someone was in the East Wing, near Lady Beatrice's suite. They moved so quickly. I couldn't see who it was, but they dropped something." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. "Dropped what exactly?" Clara glanced around, then leaned closer. "A key. Not a room key, but something older, heavier. I didn't touch it, but it looked like it belonged to something important." Miss Marple's mind flashed to the missing key she'd overheard on her first day. "Where is it now?" she asked. "I don't know," Clara admitted. "I was afraid to stay, so I left. But I think it's still there, near the service stairs." Miss Marple patted her hand. "You did well to tell me. Now, finish your breakfast and try not to worry. I'll see what can be done." As Clara picked at her meal, Miss Marple excused herself and made her way to the East Wing. The corridor was quiet, the guests either at breakfast or in their rooms. She paused near the service stairs, a narrow door tucked behind a tapestry. The floor was spotless, but a faint gleam caught her eye beneath a radiator. She knelt, retrieving a heavy iron key, its surface etched with a faint crest she didn't recognize. The key was no ordinary room key. It was too ornate, too old. It might belong to a vault, a chest, or even a forgotten part of the hotel. She slipped it into her reticule, her thoughts racing. The theft of the Star of Lahore was no simple crime. It was a thread in a larger tapestry, woven with secrets and motives she had yet to unravel. That afternoon, Miss Marple joined Inspector Davy in the hotel's library, a cozy room lined with leather-bound books and lit by stained glass windows. He was poring over a list of staff schedules, his pipe sending curls of smoke into the air. "Miss Marple," he said, looking up, "I suppose you've already formed a theory or two." "Only the beginnings," she said modestly, settling into an armchair. "But I wonder, Inspector, have you considered the safe's mechanism? It's a Yale model, isn't it? Quite modern, but not infallible." Davy raised an eyebrow. "You've been doing your homework." "Yes, it's a Yale, and the lock's intact. No signs of picking or drilling. Lady Beatrice swears she didn't share the combination, but I'm not so sure. She's a talker, that one." "Indeed," Miss Marple agreed. "But what if the thief didn't need the combination? A duplicate key, perhaps, or a flaw in the safe's design?" Davy frowned. "A duplicate's unlikely. Lady Beatrice keeps hers close. But a flaw? I'll have the locksmith take a look." "Whitlock's due tomorrow." Miss Marple nodded, her mind on the cufflink and the iron key. She debated sharing them with Davy but decided to wait. Clues were like seeds, they needed time to sprout before being plucked. Instead, she steered the conversation to the staff. The waiter. "Mr. Ellis," she said. "He seems rather observant. Have you spoken to him?" "Not yet," Davy admitted, "but he's on my list." "Why?" "Got a hunch about him. Only that he notices more than he lets on," she said lightly. "Hotels are like villages, Inspector. Everyone knows everyone's business, whether they admit it or not." Davy chuckled, but his eyes were sharp. "You're fishing, Miss Marple. If you've got something, spit it out." She smiled, rising. "Patience, Inspector. I'll let you know when I've something worth sharing." As she left the library, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the waiter, Ellis. His tattoo, a coiled snake, glimpsed at dinner, had startled Clara, suggesting a shared past. And his presence in the East Wing last night, as Clara had hinted, placed him near the crime. Was he a thief, a spy, or something else entirely? That evening, the hotel's ballroom glowed with anticipation for the upcoming gala. Guests mingled, their laughter tinged with unease over the theft. Miss Marple, dressed in her best black lace gown, stood near a marble column, her eyes scanning the crowd. The colonel, resplendent in his dress uniform, was regaling a group with tales of his naval exploits. Mr. Hargrove, looking more haggard than usual, sipped a brandy in a corner, and Ellis, the waiter, moved through the room with trays of champagne, his face a mask of professionalism. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the colonel. His cufflinks, she noted, were gold, not silver, and bore no anchor design. A disappointment, but not conclusive. She turned her attention to Mr. Hargrove, whose monogrammed shirt gleamed under the chandeliers. His cufflinks were silver, but plain, no anchors. Another dead end, perhaps, as she pondered. Ellis approached with a tray. "Champagne, ma'am?" he asked, his voice smooth. "Thank you," she said, taking a glass. Up close, his tattoo was hidden beneath his sleeve, but his eyes held a flicker of recognition. "You've a steady hand, Mr. Ellis," she remarked. "Not easy, with all this excitement." He smiled faintly. "One learns to keep steady, mum. Hotels are full of surprises." "Indeed," she said, her tone light. "And some surprises are best kept quiet, don't you think?" His smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. "Quite right, ma'am. If you'll excuse me." As he moved away, Miss Marple sipped her champagne, her mind buzzing. Ellis was no ordinary waiter. His poise, his quick recovery, they spoke of training, perhaps even danger. And Clara's reaction to him suggested a history that might hold the key to the theft. The night grew late, and Miss Marple retired to her room, the iron key and cufflink weighing heavily in her reticule. She sat at her writing desk, her knitting untouched, and jotted notes in her small leather-bound book. Safe unforced, combination known or bypassed, cufflink, anchor design, Colonel Hargrove, other, iron key, vault, chest, hotels past, Ellis, tattoo, Clara's fear, criminal, ally, Lady Beatrice, truthful or playing a role. She closed the book, her thoughts circling the theft. The star of Lahore was more than a jewel, it was a catalyst, exposing the hotel's hidden currents. The cufflink pointed to an insider, someone close enough to enter the suite unnoticed. The iron key suggested a deeper secret, perhaps tied to the hotel's history. And Ellis, with his shadowed past, was a wild card in the game. As she prepared for bed, A soft knock sounded at her door. She opened it to find Clara, her face pale. "Miss Marple," she whispered. "I found something else. In the service stairs a scrap of paper with my brother's name on it. He's been missing for years, but I think he's here, and I think he's in danger." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "Come in, my dear," she said, guiding Clara to a chair. "Tell me everything." As Clara spoke, the pieces of the puzzle shifted, revealing a darker picture. The theft was no isolated crime. It was a thread in a web of blackmail, betrayal, and buried secrets. And Miss Marple, with her quiet resolve, was determined to unravel it before the gala's curtain fell. Chapter 6. Whispers of a Conspiracy. Grand Aurelia's chandeliers cast a golden glow over the lounge, where Miss Jane Marple sat with her knitting, her needles clicking softly in rhythm with the murmur of conversation around her. To the casual observer, she was merely an elderly spinster, absorbed in her wool and lost in nostalgic reverie. But her sharp eyes, darting occasionally over the rim of her spectacles, missed nothing. The hotel, with its Edwardian elegance and polished veneer, was a stage, and its guests were players in a drama she was only beginning to unravel. It was the morning after the locked room jewel theft, and the Grand Aurelia buzzed with whispers. Lady Beatrice's missing sapphire had drawn a swarm of reporters to the hotel's gilded doors. Though the manager, Mr. Pennington, had deftly deflected them with promises of a thorough investigation, Scotland Yard had sent a junior officer to take statements. But Miss Marple noted his perfunctory manner a sign, perhaps, that the police suspected more than they let on. The theft, she mused, was too tidy, too theatrical. It felt like a diversion, a sleight of hand to mask something darker. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Clarence Withers, the hotel's elderly concierge, who shuffled toward her with a tray bearing a pot of Darjeeling and a plate of scones. His face, lined with decades of service, crinkled into a warm smile as he set the tray down. "Your usual, Miss Marple," he said, his voice a gentle rasp. "And might I say, it's a pleasure to see a familiar face in these hectic times." "You're too kind, Mr. Withers," she replied, her tone light but her gaze keen. "The Grand Aurelia hasn't changed a bit since my last visit, though I dare say the guests keep you busier than ever." Withers chuckled, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Oh, they do, miss. This lot's a lively bunch, actresses, colonels, heiresses, and the like. And between you and me, there's more going on than meets the eye." He glanced over his shoulder, ensuring no one was within earshot. "Strange comings and goings at odd hours. Things that don't add up." Miss Marple's needles paused mid-stitch. "Do tell, Mr. Withers. You've always had a knack for noticing the little things." He hesitated, then leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's talk among the staff, miss, about the hotel being, well, a hub of sorts. Not just for high society, but for folk with secrets to trade. Smugglers, they say, or worse. I've seen packages change hands in the service corridors, and guests meeting in places they've no business being. The basement, for one. The basement." Miss Marple's tone was mild, but her mind was racing. The basement, with its warren of storage rooms and forgotten passages, would be the perfect place for clandestine dealings. "That sounds rather intriguing. Have you mentioned this to anyone?" Withers shook his head. "Not my place, miss, but I trust you to keep it quiet. You've a sharp mind, if you don't mind me saying. Always did, even back in 23 when you stayed here last." She smiled, touched by his confidence. "You're a treasure, Mr. Withers. I shall keep my eyes open. Rest assured." As he shuffled away, Miss Marple sipped her tea, her thoughts turning to the guests she'd observed. The flamboyant Lady Beatrice, whose jewel theft seemed almost too convenient. The secretive Mr. Hargrove, whose missing briefcase hinted at financial intrigue. The heiress Clara, whose guarded demeanor suggested a hidden past. And Colonel Rutherford, whose military bearing masked a restlessness that piqued her curiosity. And then there was the waiter, Thomas, with his hidden tattoo and furtive glances. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered, but Withers' words had given her a thread to follow. Her reverie was broken by a familiar voice. "Miss Marple, fancy meeting you here." Chief Inspector Frederick Davy, a burly man with a walrus mustache, stood before her, his tweed suit slightly rumpled from travel. His eyes twinkled with recognition, though his expression held a trace of wariness. "Inspector Davy," she exclaimed, setting her knitting aside. "What a delightful surprise. Are you here for the scones, or is Scotland Yard keeping you busy?" He chuckled, pulling up a chair. "A bit of both, I'm afraid. Though I suspect you've already sniffed out more than my lads have. You've a nose for trouble, Jane." She tilted her head, her smile demure. "I'm merely an old woman with too much time on her hands. But do tell what brings you to the Grand Aurelia." Davy glanced around, ensuring their conversation was private. "Off the record, mind. We've had our eye on this place for a while. The jewel theft was a convenient excuse to poke round, but it's not the half of it. There's a network operating here, smuggling, blackmail, maybe even espionage. The hotel's a perfect front. Rich guests, discreet staff, and plenty of places to hide." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained serene. "How fascinating. And have you any suspects?" "Not yet," he admitted, "but we've intercepted coded messages passing through the hotel. Nothing concrete, but they point to a group using the Aurelia as a base. Problem is, everyone's so blasted polite. It's hard to pin anything down." She nodded thoughtfully. "Politeness can be a marvelous mask, Inspector, but masks slip, given time. Have you considered the staff? They see everything, you know." Davy's eyes narrowed. "You've got someone in mind, haven't you?" "Not precisely," she said, airily, "but I did overhear a curious remark about the basement. It might be worth a look." He grunted, scribbling a note in his pocketbook. "I'll have my men check it out. But Jane, a word of advice: don't go poking too deep. These aren't your village poachers. They play for keeps." She smiled sweetly. "I wouldn't dream of it, Inspector. Now, do try the scones. They're divine." As Davy departed, Miss Marple's mind buzzed with possibilities. The basement, the coded messages, the staff's whispers, it all pointed to a conspiracy woven into the fabric of the Grand Aurelia. But she needed more than whispers. She needed proof. That afternoon, she took a leisurely stroll through the hotel's public rooms, her knitting bag swinging gently at her side. The library, with its leather-bound tomes and hushed atmosphere, was her destination. She settled into an armchair by a window overlooking the courtyard, where guests mingled over cocktails. From here, she could observe without being noticed, a perfect vantage point. Her patience was rewarded when Colonel Rutherford appeared, his erect posture and clipped stride unmistakable. He paused by the courtyard fountain, glancing around before pulling a folded paper from his pocket. Moments later, Thomas, the waiter, approached, ostensibly to clear a glass from a nearby table. Their exchange was swift. Rutherford slipped the paper into Thomas's tray, And Thomas nodded almost imperceptibly before moving on. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. A coded message. Perhaps. The colonel's military background made him a likely candidate for espionage, and Thomas's role as a waiter gave him access to every corner of the hotel. She resolved to follow them, but discreetly. An elderly lady wandering the halls was hardly suspicious. After all, she waited until Thomas disappeared through a service door before rising, her movements slow and deliberate. The service corridor was dimly lit, its walls lined with crates and cleaning supplies. She moved cautiously, her ears straining for any sound. A muffled voice reached her. Thomas, speaking in low tones to someone unseen. The colonel's note says tonight, in the usual place, Thomas was saying. But Hargrave's disappearance has them spooked. They're talking about pulling out. Hargrave was a loose end, another voice replied, gruff and unfamiliar. He knew too much about the vault. If he's smart, he's halfway to Paris by now. Miss Marple's breath caught. The vault, Mr. Withers had mentioned it. And Hargrave's disappearance was no coincidence. She edged closer, peering around a stack of crates. Thomas stood with a man she didn't recognize, a burly figure in a porter's uniform, his face shadowed by a cap. Keep your head down, the porter said, the old bird sniffing around, and Scotland Yard's crawling all over. One wrong move, and we're done. Thomas snorted. That Marple woman, she's just a nosy spinster. No harm in her. The porter's voice hardened. Don't underestimate her. She's got eyes like a hawk. Now get back to your post before someone notices. Miss Marple retreated silently, her heart pounding. They knew she was watching. She'd have to be more careful. But the mention of the vault intrigued her. If it was tied to Hargrave's disappearance and the colonel's messages, it might hold the key to the conspiracy. Back in the lounge, she resumed her knitting, her mind racing. The vault was likely in the basement, but accessing it without arousing suspicion would be tricky. She needed an ally, someone with access to restricted areas. Her thoughts turned to Mr. Withers. His loyalty to the hotel was unquestionable, but his trust in her might outweigh his discretion. That evening, she found him polishing brass fixtures in the lobby. Mr. Withers, she said softly, might I trouble you for a moment? Of course, miss, he replied, setting down his cloth. What's on your mind? She lowered her voice. I've heard rumors about the basement, about a vault. Perhaps. I know it's none of my business, but I can't help wondering if it's connected to the trouble here. Withers' face paled. The vault. That's old history, miss. Sealed up years ago, after the war. No one's been down there in decades. But someone might have. She pressed gently. And, if they have, it could explain a great deal. Would you help me, Mr. Withers? Just a look, to set my mind at ease. He hesitated, his eyes searching hers. Finally, he nodded. For you, miss, I'll do it. But we'll need to be quick and quiet. Meet me by the service lift at midnight. Miss Marple returned to her room, her nerves tingling with anticipation. Midnight was hours away, but she couldn't rest. She pored over her observations, jotting notes in her small diary. The colonel's coded message, Thomas's connection to the porter, Hargrave's disappearance. The vault, it all formed a web, and she was determined to find its center. At 5 minutes to midnight, she slipped into a dark shawl and made her way to the service lift. The hotel was silent, save for the distant hum of a vacuum cleaner. Mr. Withers was waiting, a lantern in hand. Ready, miss, he whispered. As ready as I'll ever be. She replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. The lift creaked as it descended, depositing them in a musty corridor lined with cobwebs. Withers led the way, his lantern casting eerie shadows on the walls. The vault's at the far end, he said, used to store valuables during the Blitz, but it's been locked tight since. They reached a heavy iron door, its surface pitted with rust. Withers produced a key, his hands trembling as he turned the lock. The door groaned open, revealing a small chamber lined with safety deposit boxes. Dust coated everything, but Miss Marple's eyes were drawn to a corner where the floor showed signs of recent disturbance. "Look here," she said, kneeling to examine the tiles. One was loose, and beneath it lay a small leather pouch. She opened it carefully, revealing a stack of papers, letters, receipts, and what appeared to be a cipher. "Blimey," Withers breathed. "What's all this?" "Evidence, I suspect," Miss Marple said, tucking the pouch into her bag. "But we mustn't linger. Someone's been here recently, and they may return." As if on cue, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Withers doused the lantern, and they pressed themselves against the wall. The footsteps grew closer, then stopped. A voice Thomas's muttered a curse. "Someone's been here," he said. The doors unlocked. Miss Marple's heart raced. If Thomas found them, there was no telling what he'd do. She gripped Withers' arm, urging silence. The footsteps retreated, and she exhaled softly. "We must go," she whispered. They slipped out of the vault, locking the door behind them. The lift ride back was agonizingly slow, but they reached the lobby undetected. Withers was pale, his hands shaking. "Miss, I don't know what you're mixed up in, but it's dangerous. Promise me you'll be careful." "I promise," she said, patting his hand. "And thank you, Mr. Withers. You've been braver than you know." Back in her room, Miss Marple examined the pouch's contents by lamplight. The letters were cryptic, written in a code she couldn't decipher without more context. The receipts, however, were more revealing, transactions for rare artifacts, signed by names she didn't recognize but suspected were aliases. The cipher was the most intriguing, a grid of numbers and symbols, possibly a key to the kernels. Messages. As dawn broke, she hid the pouch in her knitting bag, her mind alight with questions. The vault's contents confirmed a criminal network, but who was at its head? The Colonel? Thomas? Or someone yet unseen? And what if Hargrove had he stumbled onto the truth and paid the price? She dressed for breakfast, her resolve hardened. The Grand Auralia was a house of secrets, but secrets had a way of unraveling. And Jane Marple, with her quiet wit and unassuming charm, was just the woman to pull the thread. The chapter closed with her stepping into the dining room, her eyes scanning the guests with renewed purpose. The Colonel was there, his face unreadable. As he sipped his coffee, Thomas moved among the tables, his tray steady but his gaze wary. Somewhere in this room, she knew, was the key to the conspiracy, and she would find it, no matter the cost. Chapter 7. The vanishing guest. Grand Aurelia's bar glowed with the soft amber of its crystal chandeliers, casting a warm sheen over the polished mahogany tables and the velvet upholstery of the high-backed chairs. The air carried the faint clink of glasses, the murmur of conversation, and the occasional ripple of laughter from guests who had lingered long past the dinner hour. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a discreet corner with a cup of chamomile tea, observed the scene with her usual quiet attentiveness. Her knitting needles clicked rhythmically, a deceptively mundane cover for the sharp mind cataloging every detail. The bar was alive with the hotel's eclectic clientele. Lady Beatrice, the flamboyant actress, held court at a central table, her laughter a touch too loud. her gestures a shade too theatrical. The retired Colonel Rathbone, his mustache impeccably trimmed, sat stiffly nearby, nursing a whiskey and exchanging clipped words with a waiter. Clara, the young heiress, hovered near the edge of the room, her delicate frame tense, her eyes darting as if expecting an unwelcome visitor. But it was Mr. Lionel Hargrove, the secretive businessman, who drew Miss Marple's attention most keenly. Tonight, Hargrove sat alone at the bar, his tailored suit slightly rumpled, his fingers drumming an erratic rhythm on the polished counter. His face, usually composed, bore a sheen of perspiration, and his gaze flickered toward the door with a frequency that betrayed unease. Miss Marple had noted his agitation earlier in the day, when he'd nearly collided with a bellhop while searching for his missing briefcase. Now, as she watched, Hargrove signaled the bartender, a weary man named Victor with a scar above his left eyebrow, and leaned in to whisper something. Victor's expression remained impassive, but his hand lingered on a glass a moment too long, a detail Miss Marple tucked away. "Another brandy, Mr. Hargrove?" Victor asked, his voice smooth but carrying a faint edge. Hargrove shook his head, his voice low but sharp. "Not tonight. I need clarity. Have you seen it? You know what I mean." Victor's eyes narrowed briefly before he turned to polish a glass. "Can't say I have, sir. Perhaps you misplaced it elsewhere." Hargrove's jaw tightened, and he leaned closer, his words barely audible to Miss Marple's keen ears. "Don't play games with me, Victor. I know it's here. I saw it." The exchange was cut short by a sudden outburst from Lady Beatrice's table. "Oh, darling, you simply must tell us about Cairo," she exclaimed, her voice carrying across the room. The distraction allowed Victor to step away, leaving Hargrove to slam his fist lightly on the counter, his frustration palpable. Miss Marple's needles paused. Hargrove's agitation, the cryptic reference to it, and Victor's guarded response suggested more than a lost briefcase. She recalled the torn photograph she'd found in the hallway. The previous night, a younger Hargrove with an unknown woman, their faces partially obscured by the tear. Was it the photograph? Or something more significant, tied to the whispers of a missing key she'd overheard upon her arrival? Her musings were interrupted by a sharp, raised voice. Hargrove had risen from his stool and was now confronting a man at the far end of the bar, a stranger Miss Marple hadn't noticed before. The man was lean, with a sharp jawline and a fedora pulled low over his eyes, giving him an air of calculated anonymity. Their voices were low but heated, and Miss Marple strained to catch fragments of their conversation. "You promised it would be safe," Hargrove hissed, his face flushed. "I trusted you, and now it's gone." The stranger's response was too soft to hear, but his posture relaxed, almost mocking suggested confidence. He gestured dismissively, and Hargrove's voice rose again. "Don't think you can walk away from this, Kessler. I know what you're planning." The name Kessler sent a ripple through Miss Marple's memory. She'd overheard it once before, in a hushed exchange between two maids discussing a guest who came and went like a ghost. Could this be the same man? Before she could ponder further, Hargrove stormed out of the bar, his coat flapping behind him. Kessler watched him go, a faint smirk playing on his lips, then slipped out through a side door. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her mind racing. Hargrove's behavior suggested a man on the edge, desperate, perhaps, to recover something of great value. The argument with Kessler hinted at a deeper entanglement, possibly linked to the hotel's rumored undercurrents of illicit activity. She resolved to keep a closer eye on Hargrove, but for now, she would retire to her room and review her notes. The Grand Auralia, with its gleaming facade, was proving to be a labyrinth of secrets. The next morning, the hotel buzzed with its usual elegance, but a subtle tension hung in the air. Miss Marple, having breakfasted early, lingered in the dining room, her eyes scanning the morning's arrivals. Clara sat alone, stirring her tea absently, her face pale. Lady Beatrice was absent, likely sleeping off the previous night's revelry, and Colonel Rathbone was engrossed in a newspaper, his expression unreadable. But Hargrove was nowhere to be seen. Curious, Miss Marple approached the concierge desk, where Mr. Pembroke, the elderly concierge she'd befriended, was sorting through a stack of telegrams. His lined face lit up at her approach. "Miss Marple, a fine morning, isn't it? Though I dare say the staff's in a bit of a tizzy." "Oh." Miss Marple tilted her head, her tone light but probing. "Nothing serious, I hope." Pembroke leaned closer, lowering his voice. "It's Mr. Hargrove, ma'am. He's gone. Left his room in disarray, they say, and no one's seen him since last night. The manager's trying to keep it quiet, but the maids are all aflutter." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained serene. "Gone, you say? How extraordinary. Did he leave any message?" "Not a word, ma'am. His bags are still in his room, but there's something odd a note they found, pinned to his pillow. The housekeeper wouldn't say what it said, but she looked shaken." Miss Marple thanked Pembroke and made her way to the second floor, where Hargrove's room, numbered to 114, was located. The corridor was quiet, save for a maid pushing a cart of linens. Miss Marple paused outside Hargrove's door, noting the faint scuff marks on the carpet, as if something heavy had been dragged. The lock appeared intact, but a sliver of light beneath the door suggested it was slightly ajar. Glancing around to ensure she was unobserved, Miss Marple nudged the door open and slipped inside. The room was indeed in disarray. The bed unmade, a chair overturned, and papers scattered across the desk. A single sheet of paper, pinned to the pillow as Pembroke had described, caught her eye. She approached cautiously, her gloved hand lifting the note. In a hurried scrawl, it read, "The truth lies in the vault." The words sent a chill down her spine. A vault. The Grand Auralia was an old hotel, its Edwardian grandeur hinting at hidden spaces, perhaps a safe or a secret room. But what truth did Hargrove seek, and why had he vanished? Miss Marple's eyes swept the room, landing on a small leather-bound journal tucked beneath a pile of shirts in an open suitcase. She opened it, revealing pages filled with numbers, dates, and cryptic abbreviations. K10K, 3/15, Vol T, Wing, LB Nose. The initials LB could only mean Lady Beatrice. But what did she know? And K likely stood for Kessler, the mysterious man from the bar. The reference to the vault aligned with the note, suggesting Hargrove had been pursuing something hidden within the hotel. Miss Marple pocketed the journal, intending to return it later, and continued her search. Beneath the desk, she found a hidden compartment in the drawer, revealed only when she pressed a loose panel. Inside was a folded map, yellowed with age, depicting the hotel's layout. A red X marked a spot in the basement, labeled Old Vaulty Wing. Her pulse quickened. This was no coincidence. Hargrove's disappearance, the note, and now this map pointed to a secret buried in the hotel's depths. As she folded the map, a faint creak sounded from the corridor. Miss Marple froze, her heart pounding. The door was still ajar, and through the crack, she glimpsed a shadow moving past. She waited, scarcely breathing. until the sound of footsteps faded. Slipping the map into her handbag, she exited the room, her mind ablaze with possibilities. Hargrave's disappearance was no mere flight. He was either pursuing the vault's secret, or had been silenced to protect it. Back in her room, Miss Marple spread the map across her table, her knitting abandoned. As she studied the intricate lines, the basement, according to the map, was a warren of storage rooms, service quarters, and disused spaces from the hotel's early days. The vault, marked in red, was tucked beneath the east wing, accessible only through a service stairwell. She recalled Pembroke's tales of the hotel's history, rumors of smuggled goods during the war, hidden in secret rooms to evade authorities. Could the vault be a relic of those days, now repurposed for a modern crime? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Chief Inspector Davy, his weathered face grave. "Miss Marple," he said, stepping inside. "I heard about Hargrove. Thought you might have noticed something odd last night." Miss Marple offered him a seat, her expression demure but her mind racing. "I did observe Mr. Hargrove in the bar, Inspector. He seemed distressed. An argument with a man named Kessler, I believe." Davy's eyebrows rose. "Kessler? That's a name we've come across. A slippery sort, suspected of fencing stolen goods. Did you hear what they were arguing about?" "Something about a promise broken, and something gone. I couldn't catch it all, but Mr. Hargrove was quite upset." She hesitated, then decided to share a portion of her findings. "I also found a note in his room. The truth lies in the vault. Does that mean anything to you?" Davy's eyes narrowed. "A vault? We've had our eye on this hotel for a while. Rumors of a black market ring operating out of it. A vault could be their hiding place. But Hargrove, he's a businessman, not a criminal. Or so we thought." Miss Marple nodded, choosing not to mention the map just yet. "He may have stumbled onto something dangerous, Inspector. Or perhaps he was more involved than we know." Davy rubbed his chin, thoughtful. "I'll have my men check the basement. But Miss Marple, I must ask you to be careful. If Hargrave's been taken, or worse, we're dealing with people who don't hesitate to act." "I'm always careful, Inspector," she replied with a small smile, though her mind was already planning her next move. That evening, Miss Marple donned her sturdiest shoes and a dark shawl, slipping out of her room as the hotel settled into its nightly rhythm. The service stairwell to the basement was tucked behind a nondescript door near the kitchens, its entrance half hidden by a stack of crates. She descended cautiously, her flashlight casting a narrow beam across the damp stone walls. The air grew cooler, heavy with the scent of mildew and old wood. The basement was a maze of corridors, some lined with crates, others blocked by rusted gates. Miss Marple followed the map, her steps echoing softly. The vault's entrance, according to the map, was behind a false wall in a storage room. She found the room easily enough, a cluttered space filled with broken furniture and dusty linens. The wall in question was unremarkable, but a faint seam suggested a hidden panel. She pressed gently, and with a soft click, the wall slid aside, revealing a heavy iron door. The vault. It was locked, of course, but the keyhole was large, suggesting an old mechanism. Miss Marple examined it closely, noting scratches around the lock recent, as if someone had tried to force it open. Hargrove, perhaps, or someone else. Before she could investigate further, a faint sound, a shuffle of footsteps came from the corridor. She extinguished her flashlight and pressed herself against the wall, her heart racing. The footsteps grew closer, then stopped. A low voice, unmistakably Victor's, muttered, "He was here. I know it." Another voice, colder and unfamiliar, replied, "Then find him. We can't let this get out." Miss Marple held her breath as the footsteps retreated. She waited several minutes before emerging, her resolve hardened. Hargrove had been here, searching for the vault, and someone likely Victor and his accomplice knew it. The vault held the key to his disappearance, and possibly to the larger mystery weaving through the Grand Auralia. The next morning, Miss Marple sat in the hotel's garden, ostensibly reading a novel but in truth reviewing her findings. The journal, the map, the note all pointed to a secret hidden in the vault, tied to Hargrove's desperate search and his confrontation with Kessler. Victor's involvement suggested the staff were complicit, and the presence of a criminal network, as hinted by Inspector Davy, loomed larger than ever. As she sipped her tea, Clara approached, her face pale but determined. "Miss Marple," she said softly, glancing around, "I heard about Mr. Hargrove. I think it's connected to my brother. He was here months ago, and he mentioned a vault. I think he's in trouble." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind sharpened. "Your brother, Clara? Tell me everything you know." As Clara began to speak, revealing a tale of a wayward sibling entangled in shady dealings, Miss Marple's thoughts raced ahead. The vault was the linchpin, and Hargrove's disappearance was the catalyst. Whatever lay within stolen goods, incriminating documents, or something more sinister, she would uncover it. The Grand Auralia's polished surface hid a dark underbelly, and Miss Marple, with her unassuming demeanor and razor-sharp intellect, was determined to expose it. The chapter closed with Miss Marple folding her novel, her eyes gleaming with quiet determination. The vault awaited, and with it, the truth. Chapter 8. Secrets in the basement. The air in the Grand Auralia's grand staircase was thick with the scent of polished mahogany and beeswax. But as Miss Jane Marple descended the narrow, dimly lit service stairs to the hotel's basement, the atmosphere shifted. The opulence of the upper floors gave way to a utilitarian chill, the walls rough with exposed brick, and the air heavy with dampness. Her sensible shoes tapped softly on the worn stone steps, each one echoing like a cautious whisper in the stillness. She clutched her wear-upon shawl tighter, not for warmth but for the comfort of familiarity in this unfamiliar territory. The discovery of the map in Mr. Hargrove's room, a crude sketch of the hotel's lower levels, with a bold X marking an old vault, had set her heart racing with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. Now, with Chief Inspector Davies' reluctant blessing, she was venturing into the shadows to uncover what secrets the Grand Auralia guarded below. Miss Marple had always believed that the truth, like a stubborn weed, could be found in the most overlooked corners. The basement, she reasoned, was precisely such a corner, a place where the hotel's polished facade gave way to its raw, unvarnished underbelly. Inspector Davy had warned her to be careful, his stern face softening just enough to betray his trust in her instincts. "You're not an official investigator, Jane," he'd said, adjusting his tie in the hotel's mirrored lounge. "But I know better than to stop you. Just don't touch anything you shouldn't." She'd smiled, promising nothing but a twinkle in her eye. And now here she was, alone in the labyrinthine depths of the hotel, guided only by the map and her own sharp intuition. The service stairs ended at a heavy iron door, its surface pitted with rust and age. A faint hum of machinery vibrated through the walls, likely the boilers that kept the Auralia's grandeur warm and inviting. Miss Marple paused, her hand hovering over the door's handle. The map had indicated a corridor beyond, leading to the vault, but the silence felt too perfect. too deliberate. She recalled the nervous guest she'd seen in the lobby on her first day, passing a cryptic note, and the hushed words about a missing key. Could the vault hold that key? Or something far more sinister? With a steadying breath, she turned the handle, wincing as the door creaked open, its hinges protesting after years of neglect. The corridor beyond was narrow, lined with flickering gas lamps that cast long, wavering shadows. Wooden crates, their sides stamped with faded shipping marks, were stacked haphazardly against the walls. Miss Marple's eyes darted to the labels, some in English, others in French, and a few in languages she couldn't place, perhaps Cyrillic or Arabic. The Grand Auralia, she mused, was a crossroads of the world, and its basement seemed to hold relics of its far-reaching connections. She moved forward, her steps deliberate, scanning for the turn indicated on the map. The air grew colder, the dampness clinging to her skin, and she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Though the corridor appeared empty at the first junction, she paused to consult the map, its edges frayed from being folded and unfolded in Mr. Hargreaves' anxious hands. The X was unmistakable, marking a point deep within the basement, past a series of storage rooms and a boiler chamber. As she studied the sketch, a faint scuffing sound came from behind a stack of crates to her left. Her heart quickened, but she kept her expression serene, as if merely admiring the architecture. Slowly, she slipped the map into her handbag and adjusted her glasses, using the reflection in the lenses to glance behind her. Nothing, just shadows dancing in the lamplight. Still, her years in St. Mary Mead had taught her that shadows often hid more than they revealed. Really, Jane, she murmured to herself, a habit that steadied her nerves. You're too old for skulking about like a detective in a penny. Dreadful, but skulk you must. With a wry smile, she pressed on, her senses heightened. The corridor branched again, and she followed the map's path to the right, where the air grew heavier, tinged with the metallic scent of old iron. The walls here were older, their bricks stained with decades of moisture, and the lamps were fewer, leaving patches of darkness that seemed to swallow the light. At last, she reached a heavy steel door, its surface embossed with the faded crest of the Grand Auralia lion and a rose, symbols of strength and elegance. The vault, the maps. X was here, and Miss Marple's pulse quickened as she examined the door. It was locked, of course, with a keyhole that looked too intricate for a simple skeleton key. She knelt, ignoring the ache in her knees, and peered at the lock. No scratches or signs of tampering, but a faint smudge of oil suggested recent use. Someone had been here, and not long ago. She straightened, considering her options. Inspector Davy had given her a set of lock-picking tools unofficially, of course, with a gruff warning to leave the real work to professionals. Miss Marple had accepted them with a polite nod, though she'd privately thought that her years of untangling village intrigues were qualification enough. She retrieved the tools from her handbag, selecting a slender pick and a tension wrench. Her fingers, nimble despite her age, worked with surprising dexterity, guided by a memory of a St. Mary Mead locksmith who'd once shown her the basics over tea. The lock resisted at first, its tumblers stubborn, but after a moment, a satisfying click echoed in the silence. The vault door swung open with a groan, revealing a cavernous chamber lit by a single, bare bulb dangling from the ceiling. The light cast harsh shadows over shelves lined with dusty ledgers, wooden boxes, and metal trunks. The air was stale, thick with the scent of old paper, and something sharper, perhaps chemicals or polish. Miss Marple stepped inside, her eyes scanning the shelves. The map had led her here, but what was she meant to find? Evidence of Mr. Hargrave's shady dealings? The missing key from the lobby whisper? Or something else entirely? She moved to the nearest shelf, her fingers brushing the spine of a ledger marked 1912. The pages were brittle, detailing shipments of wine, linens, and exotic spices, mundane records for a hotel of the Aurelia's caliber. But as she flipped through, a loose sheet slipped out, yellowed and handwritten. It was a list of names, none familiar, alongside numbers that looked like payments. One entry caught her eye: Col. Forsyth, £500. Discretion assured. The Colonel, she thought, her mind racing. Could this be the same Colonel Forsyth she'd observed at dinner? His questions to Clara so pointedly intrusive? She tucked the sheet into her handbag, her heart pounding with the thrill of discovery. As she reached for another ledger, a faint clatter came from the corridor outside. She froze, her breath catching. The sound was deliberate, a footstep, perhaps, or something being knocked over. She extinguished her small flashlight, plunging the vault into near darkness save for the bulb's weak glow. Her eyes darted to the door, still ajar, and she positioned herself behind a stack of crates, her slight frame blending into the shadows. Years of village life had taught her the art of being unobtrusive, and now she relied on it, her heart steady, despite the danger. The footsteps grew closer, slow and measured, as if the intruder were cautious but confident. A shadow crossed the threshold, tall and angular, pausing just inside the vault. Miss Marple peered through a gap in the crates, her breath shallow. The figure was a man, dressed in dark clothing, his face obscured by the brim of a hat. He carried a small lantern, its beam sweeping the shelves with purpose. He moved to a metal trunk in the corner, kneeling to examine its lock. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The trunk was modern, its surface gleaming compared to the dusty relics around it. Whatever was inside, it was recent and important. The man muttered under his breath, his voice low but distinctly familiar. Miss Marple strained to place it, her mind sifting through the voices she'd heard in the hotel. The waiter, no, too refined. The Colonel, too soft. Then it hit her. Mr. Hargrave, the secretive businessman who'd vanished after his argument in the bar. But how could he be here, when his room had been found empty? She watched as he produced a key, not the missing key of the lobby roomer, but a small, ornate one, and unlocked the trunk. Inside, she glimpsed bundles of papers, a glint of metal, and something that looked like a vial of liquid, its contents catching the lantern's light with an eerie shimmer. Before she could process this, a second sound came from the corridor, a sharp, metallic click, like a gun being cocked. Mr. Hargrave froze, his hand still in the trunk. "Who's there?" he hissed, his voice tight with fear. No answer came, but the air grew heavier, charged with menace. Miss Marple's mind raced. To intruders? Or had someone followed Hargrave, just as she had? She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her heart thudding but her resolve unshaken. She was no stranger to danger, though she preferred to avoid it. Now, caught between two unknowns, she knew her only weapon was her wit. The second figure appeared at the vault's entrance, a silhouette against the dim corridor light. This one was shorter, stockier, and moved with a predator's grace. "You shouldn't have come back, Hargrave," the newcomer said, their voice muffled but unmistakably threatening. Miss Marple's eyes widened. The accent was faint, but it carried a trace of the North Manchester, perhaps, or Leeds. Not a guest she'd met, but possibly one of the staff, the waiter with the tattoo, or someone else entirely. Hargrave stood, clutching a bundle of papers from the trunk. "I had no choice," he said. his voice trembling but defiant. "You think I'd let you ruin everything? After all I've done?" The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. Miss Marple's mind whirred, piecing together fragments. Hargreaves' disappearance, the map, the vault, the ledger. This was no simple theft or blackmail scheme. The Grand Aurelia was a hub, a nexus for something far larger, a black market ring. Perhaps, as the concierge had hinted. The second figure stepped closer, and Miss Marple caught a glimpse of a gloved hand holding a small pistol. "You've been careless," the figure said, "and now you've led someone else here." The words sent a chill down Miss Marple's spine. Did they know she was there? Her hiding place felt suddenly exposed, the crate too flimsy a shield. She held her breath, willing herself to remain still, her mind racing for a way out. Hargreaves' eyes darted around the vault, searching for an escape. "I didn't bring anyone," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. The other figure laughed, a low, bitter sound. "Don't lie to me. You're not the only one who's been watching." The pistol gleamed in the lantern light, and Miss Marple's heart sank. She was no match for a gun, but she couldn't stay hidden forever. If she was discovered, her investigation and perhaps her life would end here in the damp, forgotten basement. Then, inspiration struck. She reached into her handbag, her fingers brushing past the lock-picking tools to find a small, heavy compact mirror. It was a gift from her nephew Raymond, more decorative than practical. But now it might save her. Carefully, she angled it to catch the bulb's light, directing a faint beam toward the far wall. The flicker was subtle, but it was enough. Hargreaves' head snapped toward it, and the armed figure hesitated, their attention drawn to the movement. "Who's there?" The figure barked, swinging the pistol toward the wall. Hargreaves seized the moment, lunging at his assailant with surprising speed. The two men collided, the lantern clattering to the floor and plunging the vault into near darkness. Miss Marple didn't wait to see the outcome. She slipped from her hiding place, moving as swiftly and silently as her age allowed, and darted through the vault door. The corridor stretched before her, a maze of shadows. But she knew she had to reach the service stairs before either man noticed her escape. The sounds of the struggle faded as she navigated the twists of the corridor, her heart pounding but her mind clear. She reached the iron door, her hands trembling as she pushed it open. The service stairs loomed ahead, a steep climb back to safety. But as she took her first step, a hand grabbed her arm, not roughly, but firmly enough to stop her in her tracks. She turned, expecting Hargrove or his attacker, but instead found herself face to face with Clara, the young heiress, her eyes wide with fear and determination. "Miss Marple," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "What are you doing down here?" Her grip tightened, not threatening but urgent, as if she, too, had stumbled into something she didn't fully understand. Miss Marple's mind raced, but her expression remained calm, almost serene. "My dear," she said softly, "I might ask you the same question." Clara's face paled, and for a moment, the two women stood in the dim light, each weighing the other's secrets. Behind them, the basement seemed to hold its breath, its shadows hiding truths that Miss Marple was determined to uncover no matter the cost. The chapter closed with Miss Marple's heart still racing, her mind alight with questions. Who was the second figure, and what did they want with Hargrove? What role did Clara play, appearing so suddenly in the basement? And what lay in that trunk, gleaming with secrets that could unravel the Grand Aurelia's polished veneer? One thing was certain. The hotel's depths held more than dust and forgotten ledgers. and Miss Marple would not rest until she brought its hidden crimes to light. Chapter 9. The actress's confession. Grand Aurelia's chandeliers cast a golden glow across the dining room, where the clink of crystal glasses and the murmur of polite conversation filled the air. Miss Jane Marple sat at a small table near the window, her knitting needles clicking softly as she observed the room with her usual unobtrusive keenness. The events of the past days, the stolen jewel, the vanishing businessman, the whispers of a criminal network had woven a tapestry of intrigue that she was determined to unravel. Tonight, however, her attention was drawn to Lady Beatrice Langley, the flamboyant actress whose presence seemed to command the room, yet whose eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Lady Beatrice, resplendent in a sapphire gown that shimmered under the lights, was holding court at a central table, her laughter ringing out like a well-rehearsed line. Yet Miss Marple noted the way her fingers trembled as she lifted her wine glass, the way her gaze darted toward the dining room's entrance every few moments. It was the second threatening letter, slipped under her door that morning, that had clearly shaken her. Miss Marple had glimpsed the note's stark black ink from across the hall, its words too distant to read but its effect unmistakable. The actress was a woman under siege, and Miss Marple, with her quiet intuition, sensed that tonight might bring a breakthrough. As the dessert course arrived, delicate lemon tarts adorned with edible flowers, Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by a soft tap on her shoulder. She looked up to find Lady Beatrice herself, her face a mask of practiced charm but her eyes wide with something akin to desperation. "Miss Marple, isn't it?" the actress said, her voice low and musical, though it carried a tremor. "Might I have a word? Somewhere private?" Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly, but she nodded with her usual calm. "Of course, my dear. The library should be quiet at this hour. Shall we?" The two women slipped out of the dining room, unnoticed by the other guests, who were absorbed in their own dramas. The Grand Aurelia's library was a haven of polished oak shelves and leather-bound volumes, its air heavy with the scent of aged paper. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Lady Beatrice closed the door behind them, her movements swift, almost furtive. "I don't know why I'm trusting you," she began, pacing before the fireplace, her gown trailing like a comet's tail. "But you have a way about you, Miss Marple. Those sharp eyes of yours, they see things others miss." Miss Marple settled into an armchair, her knitting resting in her lap. "I'm merely an old woman who listens, Lady Beatrice, but I'm happy to hear whatever's troubling you." The actress stopped pacing, her hands twisting together. "It's those letters," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The first one was bad enough, vague threats, hints about my past. But this morning's, it was specific. It mentioned him." She paused, her lips tightening. "Colonel Rathbone." Miss Marple's fingers stilled on her knitting needles. Colonel Rathbone, the retired military man with the stiff posture and guarded demeanor, had been a figure of interest since she'd seen him slip a coded message to the waiter in the corridor. "Go on," she said gently. Lady Beatrice sank into the chair opposite, her elegance crumbling. "Years ago, before I was, well, Lady Beatrice, I was just Beatrice Langley, a struggling actress in a touring company. I was young, foolish, and in love with him, Edward Rathbone." Her voice softened, tinged with regret. "He wasn't a colonel then, just a dashing officer with big dreams. We had an affair, a reckless, passionate thing, but it ended badly. He was married, you see, and his wife, she found out." Miss Marple's expression remained serene, But her mind was racing. And this affair, she said, it's come back to haunt you. The actress nodded, her eyes glistening. The letters, they threatened to expose everything. My career, my reputation. It's all built on this image of glamour and mystery. If the world knew I'd been involved in a scandal, that I'd broken a marriage, and worse. The letters hint at something Edward did, something darker. I don't know what, but they say he'll pay for it too. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. Do you believe Colonel Rathbone is behind these letters? Lady Beatrice hesitated, then shook her head. I don't know. He's changed since those days, harder, colder. But he's here, at the hotel, and I can't help wondering if he's involved. Or if someone else knows about us and is using it against me. Miss Marple's thoughts flickered to the torn photograph she'd found in the corridor, showing Mr. Hargrove with an unknown woman. Could it be connected? And the coded message she'd seen Rathbone pass, did it tie to this? Blackmail? Have you spoken to the Colonel? She asked. No. Lady Beatrice's voice was sharp. I can't. Not after all these years. But I saw him watching me at dinner. And I swear he knows something. She reached into her purse and pulled out the second letter. Its edges crumpled. Here. Read it. Miss Marple took the note, her eyes scanning the sharp, angular handwriting. Your secret is no longer safe. The Colonel's sins will bury you both unless you pay. Instructions to follow. The words were chilling, precise, and unsigned. Miss Marple folded the note carefully, her mind cataloging every detail. This is blackmail, my dear, she said softly. And blackmailers are rarely content with one payment. We must find out who's behind this and what they know about Colonel Rathbone. Lady Beatrice's shoulders slumped. I don't know where to begin. I feel like I'm trapped in one of my own plays, but there's no script to follow. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Oh, there's always a script, Lady Beatrice. It's just written in the little things, gestures, glances, words left unsaid. Tell me, have you noticed anyone acting strangely? Anyone who might know about your past? The actress thought for a moment, her brow furrowing. There's the waiter, Tom. I think his name is. He's been odd, always lingering near my table, watching me and Clara. That young heiress, she asked me about my early career the other day. Questions that felt too pointed. I brushed her off. But now I wonder. Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions about the waiter deepening. His hidden tattoo, his connection to Clara, and now his proximity to Lady Beatrice. It was too much to be coincidence. Thank you for trusting me, she said. I'll look into this discreetly. For now, keep those letters safe and don't confront anyone. We don't want to tip our hand. Lady Beatrice managed a weak smile. You're kinder than I deserve, Miss Marple. I just want this to end. As the actress left the library, Miss Marple remained by the fire, her knitting forgotten. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to align, but the picture was still incomplete. The blackmail, the jewel theft, the coded messages, they all pointed to a web of deceit centered on the Grand Aurelia. And at its heart, she suspected, was Colonel Rathbone, determined to learn more. Miss Marple decided to observe the Colonel at the hotel's evening card game, a nightly ritual in the smoking room where the men gathered to play bridge and exchange gossip. She donned her shawl and made her way to the room, slipping in quietly to sit in a corner with her knitting, unnoticed as always. The smoking room was thick with cigar smoke and the low hum of conversation. Colonel Rathbone sat at the central table, his military bearing unmistakable even in civilian clothes. Across from him was the hotel manager, Mr. Ellison, whose polished demeanor hid a nervous energy Miss Marple had noted before. The other players included a young barrister and an older gentleman with a monocle, both minor figures in the hotel's drama. Miss Marple watched as the colonel played his cards with precision, his face unreadable. But when Mr. Ellison mentioned a recent article about wartime smuggling, Rathbone's hand paused, just for a moment, before laying down a trump card. It was a small tell, but to Miss Marple, it was as loud as a shout. As the game broke up, she caught the colonel's eye and offered a polite smile. "A fine game, Colonel," she said, her tone light. "You play with such strategy, almost like a campaign." Rathbone's lips twitched, but his eyes were wary. "Bridge is just a game, Miss Marple. No need for grand tactics." "Oh, but every move counts," she replied, her needles clicking. "And sometimes the smallest play reveals the most." He studied her for a moment, then excused himself with a curt nod. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind racing. The colonel's past, Lady Beatrice's affair. The blackmail, there was a thread connecting them, and she was determined to find it. The next morning, Miss Marple rose early, her thoughts still on the colonel. She decided to visit the hotel's archives, a small room off the concierge's desk where old guestbooks and records were kept. The elderly concierge, Mr. Pritchard, was delighted to assist, his love for the hotel's history evident in his eager chatter. "Looking for something specific, Miss Marple?" he asked as he unlocked the archive door. "Just indulging in old woman's curiosity," she replied with a smile. "I'm interested in the hotel's early days, around the war years." Mr. Pritchard's eyes lit up. Oh, the Grand Aurelia was a hub then. Diplomats, officers, even spies, some say. "We've got guest books going back decades." As he pulled out a leather-bound volume from the 1920s, Miss Marple's fingers traced the faded names. She found what she was looking for. Edward Rathbone, a guest in 1923, the same year Lady Beatrice had mentioned their affair. But another name caught her eye, written just below his: Evelyn Hargrove. Miss Marple's breath caught. Hargrove, the same surname as the missing businessman. Could it be a coincidence? She doubted it. The torn photograph, the cryptic note about a vault, and now this connection to the colonel's past, it was all coming together. "Mr. Pritchard," she said, her voice steady, "do you recall anything about an Evelyn Hargrove staying here?" The concierge frowned, his memory straining. "Hargrove. Sounds familiar. There was a scandal, I think. A woman, married to an officer, caught in some affair. The staff whispered about it for years." Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions confirmed. Evelyn Hargrove was likely the colonel's wife, and the affair with Lady Beatrice had left scars that lingered. But how did Mr. Hargrove, the businessman, fit in? Was he a relative, seeking revenge? And what did the blackmailer know? Determined to test her theory, Miss Marple sought out Chief Inspector Davy, her old acquaintance from Scotland Yard, who was staying at the hotel under the guise of a holiday. She found him in the garden, sipping tea and reading a newspaper. "Inspector," she said, settling beside him, "I believe we're dealing with more than a jewel theft. There's blackmail afoot, and it's tied to Colonel Rathbone's past." Davy raised an eyebrow, his respect for Miss Marple's instincts well established. "You've got my attention, Jane. What's the story?" She recounted Lady Beatrice's confession, the threatening letters, and the archive discovery, keeping her voice low. "I suspect the blackmailer knows about an affair between the colonel and Lady Beatrice, and perhaps something worse, something from his military days. And Mr. Hargrove, the missing businessman, may be connected to the colonel's wife, Evelyn. Davy rubbed his chin. Rathbone's record is clean, but I've heard whispers of wartime profiteering. Nothing proven, mind you. And Hargrove, his financial dealings were shady. But we've no trace of him since he vanished. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Then we must look to the hotel itself. The vault, the coded messages, the waiters. Tattoo, they're all pieces of the same puzzle. I believe the jewel theft was a distraction, meant to keep us from the real crime. Blackmail, and perhaps something even darker. Davy nodded. I'll have my men watch Rathbone and the waiter. But Jane, be careful. If this is a criminal network, they won't take kindly to your poking about. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Oh, I'm just an old spinster with a knack for noticing things. No one pays me much mind. But as she left the garden, her mind was anything but idle. The waiter, Tom, was her next target. His connection to Clara, his lingering near Lady Beatrice, and now his possible role in the blackmail scheme. It was time to learn more. That afternoon, Miss Marple positioned herself in the lounge, a strategic spot where she could watch the comings and goings of the staff. Tom was there, polishing glasses behind the bar, his movements quick and precise. But when Clara entered, his eyes flicked to her, and Miss Marple caught the briefest nod between them. Pretending to fumble with her knitting, Miss Marple dropped a ball of yarn, letting it roll toward the bar. "Oh, dear," she said, her voice tremulous. "Could you help an old woman?" "Young man." Tom hesitated, then came around the bar to retrieve the yarn. As he handed it back, Miss Marple's eyes locked onto his wrist, where the edge of his tattoo peeked out from his cuff. It was a small anchor, faded but distinct, identical to the one she'd seen in the torn photograph. "Thank you, Tom," she said, her tone warm but her gaze sharp. "You've been at the Aurelia long, haven't you?" He stiffened slightly. "A few years, ma'am. And before that," she pressed, her voice deceptively casual. "You have the look of a sailor. That tattoo navy, perhaps." Tom's face paled, but he recovered quickly. "Just a youthful fancy, ma'am. If you'll excuse me." As he retreated, Miss Marple's mind raced. The anchor tattoo linked Tom to the photograph, and possibly to Mr. Hargrove. But why was Clara involved? And how did it all tie to the Colonel and Lady Beatrice? That evening, as the hotel prepared for its grand gala, Miss Marple decided to take a risk. She slipped a note under Clara's door, requesting a meeting in the library at midnight. If Clara was searching for her missing brother, as Miss Marple suspected, she might know more about the tattooed waiter and the blackmail scheme. The library was dark when Miss Marple arrived, the fire reduced to embers. She lit a single lamp and waited, her knitting in her lap as a prop. At precisely midnight, Clara appeared, her face pale but determined. "You wanted to see me, Miss Marple?" she said, her voice steady but guarded. "Yes, my dear," Miss Marple replied. "I believe you're looking for someone, your brother, perhaps. And I think you know more about this hotel's secrets than you've let on." Clara's eyes widened, but she didn't deny it. "My brother, James, he worked here years ago, as a porter. He vanished after getting mixed up with some dangerous people. I came here to find him, or at least find out what happened." Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions confirmed. "And the waiter, Tom, does he know your brother?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. "They served together in the Navy. James told me about a man with an anchor tattoo, someone he trusted. But when I saw Tom here, he denied knowing James. I don't trust him." Miss Marple's mind clicked into place. Tom, the tattoo, the photograph, the blackmail, it was all connected. Clara, she said softly, I believe Tom is involved in something dangerous, possibly blackmailing Lady Beatrice and others, and I think your brother may have been part of it, or a victim of it. Clara's hands clenched. Then help me find the truth. Miss Marple, please. As the two women spoke, a shadow moved outside the library window, unnoticed. The gala was about to begin, and with it, Miss Marple knew the next act of this deadly drama would unfold. The jewel theft had been a feint, a distraction from the real crime, a blackmail scheme rooted in the hotel's dark past, with Colonel Rathbone and Lady Beatrice at its heart. And somewhere in the shadows, the mastermind was watching, waiting for their next move. Chapter 10. A dangerous encounter. Grand Aurelia's chandeliers cast a golden glow over the marble floors, their light dancing like liquid amber across the polished surfaces of the hotel's grand foyer. Miss Jane Marple, her small frame draped in a modest but impeccably tailored woolen shawl, sat quietly in a high-backed velvet chair near the edge of the lobby. Her knitting needles clicked rhythmically, a soft counterpoint to the distant hum of conversation and the clink of crystal glasses from the bar. To the casual observer, she was merely an elderly spinster, perhaps a touch out of place amid the hotel's opulent bustle. But her sharp eyes, hidden behind spectacles, missed nothing. The evening was alive with the energy of the hotel's guests, wealthy travelers, minor aristocrats, and the occasional enigmatic figure whose presence seemed to ripple through the room. Miss Marple's attention, however, was fixed on the waiter, Thomas, whose nervous glances and quick movements had caught her notice earlier that day. His dark hair was slicked back, his uniform crisp, but there was a tension in his posture, a subtle jerkiness that betrayed unease. She had seen him slip into the service quarter behind the bar just moments ago, and her instincts, honed by years of observing human nature, told her he was up to something. Miss Marple's fingers paused mid-stitch as she recalled the events of the past few days. The stolen jewel, the cryptic note about a missing key, the vanished businessman Mr. Hargrove, and the whispers of a criminal network threading through the hotel's gilded walls. The Grand Aurelia, for all its elegance, was a stage for secrets, and Thomas, she suspected, was more than just a waiter. His connection to Clara, the young heiress with haunted eyes, had been evident in the dining room, where a fleeting look of recognition had passed between them. Now, with the hotel buzzing in preparation for tomorrow's grand gala, Miss Marple sensed the threads of the mystery tightening. She tucked her knitting into her bag and rose, smoothing her skirt with a practiced motion. The lobby was crowded, but she moved with quiet purpose, her steps light and unobtrusive. The service corridor Thomas had entered was tucked behind a heavy velvet curtain, its entrance partially obscured by a potted palm. Miss Marple glanced around, ensuring no one was watching, then slipped through the curtain, her heart beating a little faster, not from fear, but from the thrill of pursuit. The corridor was dimly lit, its walls lined with faded wallpaper and stacked crates of wine and linens. The air smelled faintly of polish and dust, a stark contrast to the perfumed elegance of the guest areas. Miss Marple's soft-soled shoes made no sound as she crept forward, her ears straining for any hint of movement. A low murmur of voices reached her, coming from a bend in the corridor where a narrow staircase descended to the hotel's lower levels. She paused, pressing herself against the wall, her small frame blending into the shadows. The voices were hushed but urgent, carrying the weight of secrecy. One was Thomas's, his tone sharp with anxiety. The other was unfamiliar, deeper, and rougher. With a faint accent she couldn't place, perhaps Eastern European, though she wasn't certain. Tonight's the last chance, Thomas was saying, his voice barely above a whisper. The gale is tomorrow, and they'll be watching everything. If we don't get it done now, it's over. You're getting cold feet now, the other voice snapped, low and menacing. You knew the stakes when you signed on. The boss doesn't take kindly to hesitation. I'm not hesitating, Thomas retorted, but there was a tremor in his words. I just don't like how messy this is getting. Hargreaves gone, the police are sniffing around, and that old woman's been watching me like a hawk. Miss Marple's lips twitched into a faint smile. That old woman, indeed. She adjusted her position slightly, careful not to rustle her shawl, and leaned closer to catch every word. Keep your voice down, the stranger hissed. The old lady's nobody, just a nosy guest. Focus on the job. The vault's ready, and the package is in place. We move at midnight, before the gala throws everything into chaos. The vault. Miss Marple's mind raced. She had explored the hotel's basement just the day before, discovering an old vault sealed since the hotel's early days. Its heavy iron door rusted but intact. The concierge had mentioned it was used for storage long ago, but her findings traces of smuggled goods, hidden compartments suggested it was far more than that. Could this package be tied to the black market ring Chief Inspector Davy had hinted at? And what was Thomas's role in it? The voices stopped abruptly, and Miss Marple held her breath as footsteps approached. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her heart steady despite the danger. Thomas emerged from the bend, his face pale, his eyes darting nervously. Behind him was a taller man, broad-shouldered, with a scar running down his left cheek. His dark coat was slightly askew, as if he'd dressed in haste, and his hand rested near his pocket, suggesting he was armed. Miss Marple's keen eyes noted the bulge, a small pistol, perhaps, or a knife. The men passed within inches of her, oblivious to her presence. She waited until their footsteps faded, then exhaled softly. Her mind was already piecing together the fragments. Thomas's fear, the stranger's authority, the mention of a boss and a package. The gala, with its crowds and distractions, would be the perfect cover for whatever they were planning. But tonight was their deadline. She needed to act quickly, and Miss Marple retraced her steps, slipping back into the lobby just as a group of guests burst into laughter near the bar. Masking her reappearance, she scanned the room and spotted Clara, the heiress, standing alone by a tall window overlooking the hotel's gardens. Her delicate features were drawn, her fingers twisting the fringe of her shawl. Miss Marple had sensed Clara's unease from the moment they met, but their brief interactions had revealed little beyond the girl's guarded nature, and her cryptic comment about the waiter. He shouldn't be here. Approaching Clara required tact. Miss Marple crossed the lobby, pausing to admire a vase of lilies as if by chance, then settled into a chair near the heiress. Such a lovely evening, she remarked, her tone warm and unassuming. Though I find these grand hotels can be rather overwhelming, don't you? Clara started, her green eyes flicking toward Miss Marple. Oh, yes, I suppose so, she said, her voice soft but strained. It's all a bit much sometimes. Miss Marple smiled, her needles resuming their gentle rhythm as she pulled her knitting from her bag. I find it's the people who make a place interesting. So many stories, all woven together. I couldn't help but notice you seemed troubled earlier. My dear, is everything quite all right? Clara's fingers stilled, and for a moment, Miss Marple thought she might bolt. But something in the older woman's kind, steady gaze seemed to anchor her. It's complicated, Clara said at last, her voice barely audible. I shouldn't even be talking to you. Sometimes, Miss Marple said gently, talking to a stranger is easier than keeping it all inside. I've no one to tell. You know, just an old woman who listens. Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp, watching Clara's every reaction. Clara hesitated, then leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. It's about my brother, Edmund. He's mixed up in something terrible. I came here to find him, to bring him home. But I think he's in deeper than I realized. And that waiter Thomas, he knows something. I saw them together years ago, before Edmund disappeared. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind racing. Clara's brother, Edmund. The pieces were beginning to align, though the picture was still incomplete. Disappeared, she prompted gently. That must be terribly worrying for you. Clara nodded, her eyes glistening. He was always reckless, always chasing some grand scheme. 2 years ago, he vanished after telling me he'd found a way to make things right. I thought he was dead until I saw Thomas here. Edmund used to work with him, back when they were both in London's underworld. I don't know what they're doing now, but it's dangerous, and I'm afraid Edmund's in trouble. Miss Marple's mind flashed to the conversation she'd overheard. The final job at midnight, the vault, the package. Could Edmund be the unseen figure Thomas and the scarred man were working for or against? She kept her expression serene, but her thoughts were electric. Have you seen your brother here, my dear? She asked. Clara shook her head. Not yet, but I know he's close. I can feel it. And Thomas, he's scared. Miss Marple, I saw it in his eyes when he looked at me. Whatever they're planning, it's happening soon. Miss Marple nodded, her mind already plotting her next move. Thank you for trusting me, Clara. I think it best if we keep this between us for now. But if you see anything unusual tonight, do come to me. I'm in room 214. Clara managed a small, grateful smile. I will. Thank you, Miss Marple. As Clara slipped away, Miss Marple's gaze returned to the lobby, her thoughts racing. Midnight was only a few hours away, and the hotel's labyrinthine corridors held secrets that could turn deadly. She needed to follow Thomas again, but this time, she couldn't risk being seen. The scarred man's presence suggested a level of danger she hadn't anticipated, and Clara's revelation about her brother added a new layer to the puzzle. She rose, her movements deliberate, and made her way to the hotel's library, a quiet room tucked away from the main bustle. It was a place where she could think, plan, and perhaps find a clue among the hotel's records. The library was dimly lit, its shelves lined with leather-bound volumes and old guest registers. A treasure trove for someone with Miss Marple's knack for uncovering hidden truths. She settled at a mahogany table, pulling an old register from 1920, the year the Grand Auralia had opened. Her fingers traced the faded ink, searching for any mention of a vault or its purpose. The hotel's early days were shrouded in rumor tales of wartime smuggling, hidden fortunes, and shadowy deals. As she turned the pages, a loose sheet slipped out, yellowed and brittle. It was a blueprint of the hotel's basement, marked with a small, circled X near the vault. Miss Marple's breath caught. The X was precise, drawn in red ink, and beside it was a handwritten note. Safe deposit. Restricted access. Key held by manager. The vault wasn't just a relic, it was a focal point. A place where secrets were locked away. And if Thomas and his accomplice were targeting it, the package could be something far more valuable or dangerous than smuggled goods. She tucked the blueprint into her bag, her resolve hardening. She needed to get to the vault before midnight, but she couldn't go alone. Inspector Davy, her old acquaintance from Scotland Yard, was staying in the hotel, and while he was skeptical of her meddling, he trusted her instincts. She scribbled, "A note, meet me at the service stairs, 11:30 p.m. urgent." J.M. Ann slipped it to a bellboy with instructions to deliver it to Davy's room. The clock in the library chimed 10, its soft toll a reminder of the ticking deadline. Miss Marple returned to her room to prepare, changing into a darker shawl and sturdier shoes. She tucked a small flashlight into her pocket, a habit from her many adventures in St. Mary Mead. Her heart was steady, but her mind buzzed with possibilities. Thomas, the scarred man, Clara's brother, each was a piece of the puzzle. But the picture was still incomplete. At 11:15, she made her way to the service stairs, moving silently through the now quiet corridors. The hotel's glamour faded in these back passages, replaced by the stark reality of peeling paint and creaking floors. She reached the staircase just as Inspector Davy appeared, his broad frame filling the doorway. His gray eyes narrowed as he spotted her. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice low but tinged with exasperation. "I should have known you'd drag me into something like this." "What's this about?" She explained quickly, recounting the overheard conversation, Clara's confession, and the blueprint. Davy's skepticism softened as she spoke, replaced by a grudging respect. "You're sure about this vault business?" he asked. "As sure as I am that Mrs. Bantry's roses are the envy of St. Mary Mead," she replied, her tone firm but with a hint of humor. "Something's happening tonight, Inspector, and I don't intend to let it slip through our fingers." Davy sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "All right, but you stay behind me. And no heroics. If there's trouble, you let me handle it." Miss Marple nodded, though her eyes gleamed with determination. They descended the staircase, the air growing cooler and mustier as they reached the basement. The vault loomed ahead, its iron door glinting faintly in the dim light. Davy checked his watch. 11:45. They had minutes to spare. They positioned themselves behind a stack of crates, the same spot where Miss Marple had narrowly escaped detection the day before. The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant drip of a pipe. Then, footsteps quick, purposeful. Thomas appeared, carrying a small satchel, his face pale and slick with sweat. Behind him was the scarred man, his hand still near his pocket. Miss Marple's breath caught as a third figure emerged from the shadows. A young man with Clara's green eyes and sharp features, but hardened by years of rough living. Edmund, she thought, her heart sinking. Clara's brother was no victim. He was part of the plot. "Everything's set," Edmund said, his voice low but commanding. "The package is inside. We get it out, deliver it to the buyer, and we're done. No more loose ends." Thomas hesitated, his hands trembling. "What about the police? That inspector's been poking around, and enough." The scarred man snapped, his hand dipping into his pocket. "You do your part, or you're the loose end." Miss Marple's mind raced. The package was in the vault, but the door was locked, and the manager held the key. How did they plan to open it? She glanced at Davy, who was already reaching for his revolver, his jaw set. Before they could act, a soft gasp echoed behind them. Miss Marple turned, her heart lurching as she saw Clara, her face pale, standing at the base of the stairs. She had followed them, her eyes wide with shock as they locked onto her brother. "Edmund?" she whispered, stepping forward. The men spun around, the scarred man drawing a knife with a swift, practiced motion. Thomas froze, his satchel dropping to the floor. Edmund's expression flickered surprise, then guilt, then cold resolve. "Clara, get out of here," he said, his voice tight. "You shouldn't be here." But Clara didn't move. Her eyes blazed with a mix of betrayal and determination. "I came to save you," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "But you're not trapped, are you? You're part of this." The scarred man lunged toward Clara, his knife glinting. Davy sprang forward, his revolver raised. But Miss Marple was faster. With a swift motion, she swung her heavy knitting bag, catching the scarred man's wrist. The knife clattered to the floor, and Davy tackled him, pinning him against the crates. Thomas bolted, but Edmund grabbed him, his face contorted with rage. "You idiot," he hissed. "You led them here." Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding. "Enough, gentlemen. I believe Inspector Davy has questions for all of you." Clara's eyes met Miss Marple's, a mix of gratitude and pain in her gaze. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought I could save him." Miss Marple placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Sometimes, my dear, we can only do our best. The rest is up to them." As Davy cuffed the scarred man and called for backup, Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the vault. The package was still inside, its contents a mystery. But the night's events had forged an uneasy alliance with Clara, and Miss Marple knew the truth was closer than ever. The gala loomed, and with it, the chance to unmask the mastermind behind the hotel's hidden crimes.